Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Pokémon. Blue Star is also have a Pokémon Master. Chapter 41. The moment he saw Zonlong, Suyi knew that things had taken a turn for the better. If he were to face the black-horned dragon alone, it would be a life-and-death chase, and only with the help of outside forces could he have a glimmer of hope. Suyi gritted his teeth, turned over decisively and jumped down from the cliff. The black-horned dragon below stared at Suyi and roared furiously. "I'll dodge you." Suyi, who was falling, aimed a flash bomb at the black-horned dragon. Bah! The light flashed suddenly, and the black-horned dragon took a step back and shook its head. The next moment, Suyi projected a flying claw and hooked onto the head of the black-horned dragon. The next moment, a huge figure blocked the sun and jumped down from the cliff. There was a loud bang. Zonlong looked at the black-horned dragon, and flames ignited in his mouth. Full bomb. Fire! Fire! Suyi quickly stabilized his body. While looking at Zonlong, he aimed at the head of the black-horned dragon and shot out all the flying walnuts in the projector. Bang! The burst of flying walnuts at close range made a huge explosion, which instantly frightened the black-horned dragon. It staggered and rushed towards the Zonlong directly in front of it as if it was frightened. Roar! Looking at the black-horned dragon attacking it, Zonlong twisted his body, transferred his power to the tail of the sword, and then slammed the tail blade. Clang! The tail of the heavy sword, which was smelted with countless metals, tore through the wind and sand, and hit the big horn of the black-horned dragon from top to bottom. Click! The blade tail and the big horn were facing each other tit for tat. An obvious gap was made in the horn of the black-horned dragon by the sharp blade. A wound was torn open on the forehead of the black-horned dragon. It was almost blinded by it. The black-horned dragon roared angrily. For a moment, the wind and sand sweeping, evil wind gusts. The plan worked. Suyi had already fallen to the ground when all the bombs were fired. At this moment, he looked at the black-horned dragon who had a conflict with Zonlong and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Swish! Zonlong swung the tail of his sword and rubbed it against the ground quickly and neatly. Sparks flew away and flames ignited. The metal-coated tail blade instantly burned red, like a sword with flowing flames. The black-horned dragon roared ferociously, then lowered its head and aimed its sharp devil horn at Zonlong. Suyi, meow! Stop watching the show and come up quickly, meow! Lu Kao climbed up the rock wall and reminded Suyi in a low voice. Here we come. Suyi felt a little regretful, but felt that his life was important. He projected a hook, nailed it to the rock wall, and quickly pulled himself up the rock wall. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. Zonlong and Black-Horned Dragon were fighting fiercely below. Zonlong lifted the tail of his sword, and a wave of flames suddenly set off a prairie fire, hitting Suyi who had just flown up the rock wall. Aha! Suyi was instantly burned by the flames and his hands shook. The hook fell off and his body fell rapidly. Roar! The black-horned dragon that had avoided the flames raised its head and roared, and Suyi just landed on the bone plate of the black-horned dragon's head. Suyi endured the scorching burns on his body and cursed angrily. Suyi, meow! Mao Mao jumped down and landed behind Suyi without saying a word. Suddenly, the black-horned dragon lowered its head, and Suyi immediately slid down from the bone plate. Suyi quickly hugged the black-horned dragon's horn. Suyi, come up, meow! Lu Sao suddenly screamed. Suyi looked in the direction that Zhao was facing, and suddenly the soul of the dead came out. Zonlong was biting the blazing red tail blade, grinding it little by little with the sharp outer teeth of his jaws. The impurities on the tail blade fell rustlingly, and the place where the blade was aimed was the horn on the head of the black-horned dragon, that is, Suyi's location. Roar! The black-horned dragon roared angrily, pointed its horn at Zonlong and rushed over. Zonlong's eyes were full of fighting spirit, its steps were steady, and the tail blade in its mouth was ready to go. Black-horned dragon's furious dragon cart versus Dragon Slaying's blazing blade swing. Grass. Suyi ignored everything and flew to the side, getting away from the head of the black-horned dragon. The next moment, there was just a sound as one of the black horns of the black-horned dragon was thrown high, then fell suddenly, and was inserted into the sand beside Suyi with a thud. Gone. Suyi broke out in a cold sweat, and the broken corner next to him was still glowing with fire and heat. On the other side, the black-horned dragon, whose horn had been wiped off by the fiery tail blade, angrily pushed up the dragon from the bottom up, and then threw it violently to the side. Boom, boom, the earth trembled and earth and rocks flew. Suyi, meow, are you okay, meow? Lu Kao, who had already nimbly slipped off the dragon's back, flew over and asked worriedly. It's okay, I'll collect the interest first. Suyi stood up quickly, touched the severed horn of the black-horned dragon, and quickly put it into the items column. You shouldn't join in the fun, Suyi said in shock. And as if to punish Suyi, who often watches the excitement, the real noise maker is here. Angao, high nasal voice, giant wings that cover the sky and the sun. The jet black exploding scales keep falling down. Coming, the New World Police is here with its speakers. All the eyes present were attracted by the huge figure slowly descending in the sky. From the chin to the chest and abdomen, explosive scales hanging from the glands were scattered one after another like solids. Bang! The explosive scale dragon landed with a bang, and the dark scales that fell to the ground suddenly turned red and hot under the impact. Within a few breaths, the scales exploded, turning into pieces of fire to welcome the elegant and brutal flying in. Suddenly, the three monsters roared without showing any signs of weakness, and the roaring roar echoed throughout the wasteland canyon. At the same time, it also damaged Suyi's eardrum. Black-horned dragon, killer dragon, explosive scale dragon. What kind of hell drawing is this? Suyi gritted his teeth and covered his ears. The explosive scale dragon raised its body and hit the ground heavily with its lower body that was recovered with scales. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and Black-horned dragon and Zonlong were not to be outdone, venting their strength one after another. Rustle, rustle. The sand and rocks slid down. Suyi looked up and saw that the tall rock wall next to him had cracked due to the fierce fighting. The rocks were falling apart, and everything was in danger. Run away. Suyi ran wildly, followed closely by Mao Mao with his feet on the ground. The giant wings of the explosive scale dragon flapped, stirring up strong wind and sand. Suyi stretched out a hand to block the wind pressure and quickly passed through the giant wings. There was a cry. Suyi lowered his body, kept walking, and the glowing red tail blade swept across his arched back, and Suyi could feel the heat on it. Boom! The black-horned dragon flapped its wing claws, and as earth and rocks flew, its huge body quickly penetrated into the ground. Under the huge vibration, the ground cracked, extending to the already fragile rock wall next to it. Bang! Boom! Finally, the rock wall was overwhelmed and cracked and collapsed. Thousands of hectares of earth and rock collapsed, as if it was the end of the world. Suffer it. Suyi staggered and tripped over the cracked ground. Then, the crack gradually expanded and connected with the cracked rock wall. Finally, it revealed a deep crack leading to an unknown place below. Suyi meow. The cat stretched out its paws to catch Suyi. Unexpectedly, its feet were also cracking. The next moment, Lu Sao and Suyi were swallowed up by the cracks where rolling stones kept falling. Well, Suyi was dazed and heard a noisy sound in his ears. What happens? Some memory fragments started flashing back in my mind. Black-horned dragon, slaying dragon, exploding scale dragon, collapsing rock walls and rapidly falling bottomless abyss. Suyi woke up instantly. Yes, I fell into a chasm in the canyon. Where am I now? Suyi raised his head suddenly, but he only felt aches all over his body, his hands and feet were weak, and there was a burning sensation on his skin. Ouch! Gah! Two familiar voices rang in his ears. Suyi looked up and saw that in the dim environment, the ferocious jackal dragon and the scratching bird were angrily confronting something noisy. Suyi, meow, you're awake, meow, that's great, meow, came Lu Sao's surprised voice. Where is this? Suyi stood up with Lu Sao's help. Ha ha, see ya. The noise was like the neighing of reptiles, rising and falling. Suyi took a closer look, and in the dim environment, 8 or 9 large lizards with black background and yellow patterns were like jackals, surrounding Suyi and his party, constantly harassing them. The big ferocious jackal dragon and scratching bird that don't know when to play are driving away these creatures. That's the ferocious jaw dragon. Am I in the valley of miasma? Suyi, who recognized the big lizards, immediately reacted. Seeing Suyi wake up, the ferocious jackal dragon and the scratching bird surrounded Suyi to protect him. Thank you very much. Suyi touched them. He didn't know how long they had been guarding him. Suyi was very grateful. The appearance of these annoying guys also means that their leader, the great ferocious jaw dragon, is also nearby. Su Yi frowned slightly. Said Cao 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 has arrived. On the dim rocky ground, a figure smaller than the big dire jackal slowly walked into the middle of the dire jaw dragon group. It has a similar color scheme to Deregnathus, but it has wide neck fans on both sides of its neck similar to that of a cobra. The person who came was none other than the boss of the ferocious jaw dragon, the toothed dragon monster big ferocious jaw dragon. No, the great ferocious jaw dragon opened its mouth and screamed, revealing two long paralyzing fangs like poisonous snakes in its mouth. Yellow-green paralyzing venom dripped from the fangs, making it look extremely vicious. And with the roar of the big ferocious jaw dragon, all the ferocious jaw dragons rustled and quickly crawled towards Su Yi and his party, showing their fangs. Do you think I'm easy to bully? The ferocious jackal dragon. Dragon claw. Tickling the bird. Hit hard with a solid rock. Su Yi commanded coldly. The big ferocious jackal roared ferociously, and instantly swung out its sharp dragon claws, knocking away several of the ferocious jawed dragons that rushed forward. Their flesh and blood flew everywhere for a while, and some of the unlucky ones were even gutted and disemboweled. Tickling Bird is holding the hard rock, and using his hands and feet flexibly to open the ladle one by one for the ferocious jaw dragon. Every time the hard stone is hit, it will make a creepy bone-cracking sound. No, the great ferocious jaw dragon raised its head and roared again, and the big hood around its neck vibrated violently, spreading the sound even further. In just a few seconds, 5 or 6 more ferocious jaw dragons emerged from all corners of the surroundings, as if they were endless. If the big ferocious Jackalosaurus wandering around with the ferocious jackal dragon as the gangster leader, then the big ferocious jaw dragon is a veritable godfather of gangsters. With its call, countless thugs will swarm in. Capture the thief first. Capture the king first, Su Yi said, commanding the big ferocious jackal dragon to rush towards the big ferocious jaw dragon. After swatting away countless fierce jaw dragons that were coming one after another, the big fierce jackal dragon approached the big fierce jaw dragon at a high speed. Use Dragon Claw, Su Yi shouted. The great ferocious jackal lifted up its shining dragon claw and swung it fiercely at the great ferocious jaw dragon. Not to be outdone, the big ferocious jaw dragon attacked, but in terms of strength, the big ferocious jaw dragon was completely inferior to the big ferocious jackal dragon that used the move. In an instant, it was pinned to the ground by the dragon's claws. Taishan is overwhelming, Su Yi ordered in one go. The big ferocious jackal lifted up its abdomen and slammed it down hard. Suddenly, the big ferocious jaw dragon let out a cry of pain, and the surrounding ferocious jaw dragons quickly gathered around to rescue the boss. Dragon Tail. The big ferocious jackal dragon raised its tail at the command, and the light green dragon scales wrapped its slender tail. Then it swept its tail fiercely, and the ferocious jaw dragon that rushed up was severely slapped away. Dragon Claw again. Ouch! The big ferocious jackal roared loudly, and vigorously waved its claws to fill in a few more ferocious wounds on the big ferocious jackal dragon, which immediately made its momentum weaken. I didn't expect that the next one I would conquer would be the great ferocious jaw dragon. Su Yi took out the elf ball and threw it at the great ferocious jaw dragon. Snapped. The poke ball fell to the ground without any reaction. Huh, the poke balls in the Pokemon world can't capture monsters. Doesn't that mean I can only use the capture balls provided by the system to capture monsters? Su Yi said unexpectedly. This means that he still has to cherish the captured balls given by the system. Su Yi quickly replaced the remaining 7 capture balls, and then threw them again at the struggling big ferocious jaw dragon. In an instant, the big ferocious jaw dragon was caught in the ball. Bang! The capture ball shakes violently. Bang! Shake again. Su Yi frowned. Didn't he strike hard enough? Bang! The big ferocious jaw dragon broke through the ball, then panted heavily and looked at Su Yi warily. Roar! A frightening roar came from the depths of the Miasma Valley. What's going on? Su Yi was almost frightened by the monster that would suddenly appear from nowhere. When the great ferocious jaw dragon heard this movement and its current injury, it immediately ran in one direction without looking back. HMPH. Want to run away? Su Yi quickly took back the big ferocious jackal, mounted the scratching bird and chased after the big ferocious jaw dragon. When the leader left, the ferocious jaw dragon, which had been fighting desperately just now, immediately dispersed. In the Valley of Miasma, many areas are filled with strong miasma. Inhaling it rashly will harm the body, and long-term inhalation will also have a devastating impact on the physical condition. But there is a temporary way to deal with miasma, which is to use fire to burn away the miasma and obtain a short-term miasma-free area. Just like that, Suyi sat on the back of the scratching bird, released the burning bug and held it in his arms, using sparks to burn away the miasma. As the bird walked through the miasma valley filled with bones and rubble, the surrounding scenery became more and more uncomfortable. The rancid minced meat, the twisted bones of unknown creatures, and the noisy insects. Is this the Valley of Miasma? Meow. Ahem, it smells so bad, meow. Why is it like this here? Mau Mau asked, covering his nose. Ahem, this is a huge cemetery. In addition to the corpses that fell here from the coral platform, there are also many old and powerful ancient dragons buried here. Suyi said. Did you see that huge skeleton? That's the remains of the super large ancient dragon Snake King. Suyi pointed at a huge skeleton standing upright from the rock and soil in the distance. What a big bone, meow. Doesn't that mean we are walking on the remains of a very large monster, meow? Mau Mau exclaimed. Suyi smiled and said, it's amazing, new world. The scratching bird carefully walked through the bones and carrion, and walked along an upward winding slope. The miasma around it was much lighter, and it was no longer so suffocating. Roar. The roar came again, and the guide insect leading in front shrank instantly. It can't be some ruthless character again. Let me think about what ruthless characters are in the Valley of Miasma. Why are those police officers all in my mind? Suyi said with a headache. Suyi can't decide what monsters will appear in a place. All he can do is adapt to circumstances and use all means flexibly. It's a blessing, not a curse. It's a curse that can't be avoided. People can't always be so unlucky. Suyi gritted his teeth and continued to track the great ferocious jawed dragon. In fact, Suyi didn't value the strength of the great ferocious jawed dragon, but the power of its subordinates here. As long as he subdues the big ferocious jawed dragon, it will be equivalent to being able to command a large group of ferocious jawed dragon disciples. It will be much more convenient for Suyi whether it is collecting supplies or inquiring about the situation. No matter what happens, these guys can be used as cannon fodder when necessary. Moreover, currently in the Valley of Miasma, only the Great Duregnathus is easy to bully. The Great Duregnathus, which has obtained the power of Pokémon, can definitely defeat the Great Duregnathus even when there are not many Duregnathus. Following the guidance of the guide insect, Suyi rode a scratching bird to a huge mass grave. Carrion and bones were piled on the ground in layers. Dried black blood and sticky flesh were mixed among the bones, emitting waves of unpleasant rotten smell. Ah, this smell, ah, Suyi retched while carefully identifying the guiding traces of the guide insects in the dim miasma. Suyi meow, meow over there. Lu Sao, who was sitting behind him, pointed to the distance and said. Suyi looked intently and saw rustling movement among the pile of corpses, with several ferocious jawed dragons looming in the miasma. Big ferocious jackal, use loud roar. As soon as the big ferocious jackal dragon released the ball, it used a loud roar towards the pile of corpses, and the evil energy turned into a shock wave and swept away. With a bang, the corpse bones and the ferocious jaw dragon were exploded, and the big fever jaw dragon appeared with a piece of meat in its mouth, and then fled quickly. Burning insect, use sparks. Suyi threw the elf ball from a distance. As soon as the burning bug appeared, it fired sparks in front of it. The flames ignited the miasma, and with a bang, a wall of fire was ignited on the escape route of the great ferocious jaw dragon. The fierce jackal dragon, dragon claw, Suyi shouted. The big ferocious jackal roared forward and swung its claws. Hiss, a bloody scar appeared on the side of the big ferocious jaw dragon. The big ferocious jaw dragon was also shaken out of its ferocious nature. It turned around and bit the big ferocious jackal dragon with its paralyzed teeth. Bite. The big ferocious jackal dragon quickly responded to the command, lowered its head and bit the big ferocious jaw dragon on the back of its neck, stopping it from biting forward. Tickling the bird, give it a fatal blow, a hard blow from a solid rock. Suyi patted the tickling bird under him. Tickling bird quickly condensed an energy rock, and then smashed it towards the restrained big ferocious jaw dragon from a distance. Bang! The solid stone shattered, the head of the big vicious jaw dragon was broken and bleeding, and his face looked miserable. Now, Suyi threw the catching ball with all his strength. Ouch! A dark red figure that has been lurking in the miasma for a long time can no longer hold you back. It rushes out of the miasma and pounces on the great ferocious jaw dragon. Boom! The figure just blocked the capture ball and was sucked into the ball. What the hell? Brother Flathead. Suyi saw clearly that the figure that was sucked into the ball was none other than the Misty Claw Dragon, which the hunter called Brother Flathead of Miasma Valley. Bang! Bang! The capture ball just shook for a moment before exploding. Ying ying ying. The Dionysus that broke out of the ball was obviously shocked by being suddenly loaded into the ball. It sniffed around vigilantly and made a squeaking sound. I wasted another ball. The sneak attack of the Misty Claw made Suyi's already low number of captured balls even worse. Big ferocious jackal dragon, hold it back and tickle the bird, you come in too. Be careful, the other party is a ruthless character. Suyi turned over and got off the bird, arched his body and jogged towards the dying big ferocious jackal dragon. The big ferocious jackal dragon pounced on the miserable claw dragon, and then used bite. The teeth covered in white light were only slightly embedded into the hard leather-like red skin, and were blocked by the tough muscles of the Misty Claw. Ah! The ferocious claw dragon roared angrily, and its strong body bounced up like a taut bow. It suddenly lifted up the ferocious jackal dragon, which was almost as heavy as it, and moved at a certain distance. This is why the whole body is full of muscles. Suyi sighed as he looked at the red body of the Misty Claw dragon with obvious muscle lines all over its body. Moreover, although the appearance of the Misty Claw looks like the liquor in Resident Evil, with its bright red muscles exposed, the fact is that it is wrapped in a tough skin and fine scales, and its defense is not weak at all, and makes it very flexible. The big ferocious jackal dragon has no combat advantage in front of it. Gah! The tickle bird saw the opportunity when the Misty Claw dragon was dragged down by the big ferocious jackal dragon, and he hugged the rock and smashed it down hard. The Misty Claw screamed in pain and was hit on the head, but it immediately swung its claws to fight back. The two overlapping claws struck back fiercely and swept the scratching bird away. Gah wow! The bird fell to the ground with a bang and let out a miserable cry. Is it too early to forcefully fight the claw dragon? Suyi gritted his teeth and said unwillingly. Hold on. Suyi quickly approached the great ferocious jaw dragon and threw the capture ball in his hand again. On the other side, the Misty Claw twisted its body and opened its mouth to bite the big ferocious jackal dragon, biting its side. The ferocious fangs of the ferocious jackal instantly cut through the flesh and pierced into the muscles. The big ferocious jackal's eyes widened in pain, but it did not let go. Instead, it used its biting moves to tear apart the muscles of the ferocious claw again. The ferocious jackal dragon twisted its body like crazy, and its terrifying ferocious claws tore the body of the big ferocious jackal dragon, leaving bloody wounds. Bah! Suddenly, a flash bomb exploded, and the bright light instantly stimulated the Misty Claw, which had adapted to the dim environment all year round. It immediately screamed and let go of its mouth. Suyi successfully subdued the big ferocious jaw dragon, and then recovered the horribly injured big ferocious jackal into the ball. The Misty Claw shook its head, its nose twitched, and sniffed out the scent. I almost forgot that your main sense is smell. Suyi quickly reloaded the projectile. The Misty Claw sniffed for a while and immediately locked onto Suyi. However, before it could pounce, an object exuding a foul smell suddenly hit its head. Ah! The stench of the stink bomb instantly made it lose its ability to detect smell and made the stink unbearable. Suyi rode on the bird and quickly left the mass grave. This is not a place to stay for a long time. There are so many corpses here, which is a large dining hall in the valley of Miasma. Maybe some monsters will visit here later. In the deep Miasma Valley, Suyi climbed up a row of twisted black vines and came to a small platform surrounded by rock walls. It is surrounded by rocks, with occasional gaps, but the location is fairly secluded, making it a good place to camp. He's saved. Meow. Lukao wiped his sweat, took out the small medicine bottle and took a sip. Suyi sat down, feeling tired and injured from before, making his mind and body extremely exhausted. Not just me, the companion beasts were also seriously injured. Suyi released the companion beasts and Pokémon in the small space. Lucky. As soon as the lucky egg appeared, he immediately became concerned about Suyi's injury. Suyi gritted his teeth and said to the dying great ferocious jaw dragon, "I'm okay, but this guy won't be able to withstand it without treatment." Under the healing wave exerted by the Gili egg, the great ferocious jaw dragon's injuries began to improve. Suyi took out the wound medicine and approached the big ferocious jaw dragon. The gangster godfather moved in a low tone, showing great vigilance and reluctance towards Suyi. The big ferocious jackal dragon on the side roared, as if to warn it not to be ungrateful. Suyi didn't waste any time and quickly sprayed the wound medicine on the big ferocious jaw dragon. The monsters were huge, and the wounds caused by fighting each other were also large. Just treating the wounds cost Suyi several bottles of wound medicine. After the injury was taken care of, the attitude of the great ferocious jaw dragon relaxed a lot. Suyi knew that the monsters living in the Miasma Valley generally had bad tempers, so he didn't expect the great ferocious jaw dragon to recognize him all at once and obey his command. He could only get used to it slowly. Therefore, Suyi placed the big ferocious jaw dragon there and continued to treat the injuries of the big ferocious jackal dragon and tickle bird. The scratched bird's injury was fine. I sprayed it with some wound medicine and fed it some herbs. The rest was left to it to recover on its own. But the injuries on the big ferocious jackal dragon's body were much more terrifying. The injuries were lacerations from sharp teeth and cuts from cruel claws, all of which were deep wounds that penetrated the muscles. Seeing this partner who had been fighting fiercely for him, Suyi couldn't help but feel heartbroken. "You are stupid, you won't hide when it bites you," Suyi said reproachfully, but he carefully applied medicine to the ferocious jackal. The big ferocious jackal roared in a low voice, as if to say that it couldn't be held back otherwise. Half an hour later, Suyi finally treated the injuries of the accompanying beasts, and then began to treat his own injuries. Lucky, Jillidan helped Suyi treat the injury on his back, which was out of reach. He saw bruises on Suyi's back and almost no intact skin. Suyi looked at the bandages all over his body and couldn't help but smile bitterly. "I don't know how I fell into the Valley of Miasma alive." Suyi even doubted whether he had acquired the physique of a hunter. Suyi, who finally had time, slowly began to recall the details of his whereabouts in his mind. After the rock wall collapsed and opened a crack leading to the Miasma Valley, Suyi slid down along the rock cracks and against the rock formations. He was bumped by various rocks along the way and finally passed out. Presumably it was because the crack did not go straight to the bottom, but had winding passages that continuously buffered the falling trend, so Suyi didn't fall to death. It can only be said that he was lucky. "Aibo, were you not injured in the fall?" Suyi asked. "It's okay, meow. I'm relatively small and have enough space to move in the crack, so I didn't roll down, but slid down little by little." But seeing Suyi sliding down little by little, "I'm so worried, meow." Lu Kao recalled saying. It's fine. It's nothing serious." Suyi breathed a sigh of relief, and then began to think about his future plans. Now he has two choices. One is to continue exploring and then set up a camp here to facilitate his next visit. The second is to give up the exploration and continue the previous plan to go to the Big Ant Mound wasteland. If he chooses the first option, then Suyi will open up the Miasma Valley bit by bit under difficult conditions, and will not be able to leave the Miasma Valley at will. After all, Goldfinger's teleportation mechanism is to choose between teleporting to the camp or teleporting in situ. If you leave the Miasma Valley before establishing a camp, then the teleportation point is no longer here, and you may not know where to come in next time. In the game, it is because of the arrival of the lava dragon that the hunters can successfully reach the coral platform in Miasma Valley. Next time, we may not be able to find a safe way to the Miasma Valley. Moreover, if Suyi chooses to continue exploring the Miasma Valley, he must be prepared to temporarily give up the resources of the ancient tree forest. After all, before the camp is established, you cannot teleport to the seaside camp in the ancient tree forest, otherwise you will lose the teleport point to the Miasma Valley. Let's explore first and look for materials to build the camp. Although it is a bit dangerous to explore the Miasma Valley now, there is no guarantee that we will gain anything. Suyi decided. It would be even better if we could find the way to Lu Coral Platform. Roar. Ah. In the Valley of Miasma, a permeating roar sounded. The great ferocious jaw dragon stood up immediately, raised its head and listened vigilantly. The sound was not very far away from Suyi's current location. One of them seems to be the cry of the Misty Claw. Suyi identified it. What is the other voice? I'm a little curious and a little scared. Suyi was in a dilemma. Now that all the accompanying beasts are injured, they can no longer withstand the torment. Don't watch the show and find out what's going on. It's better to be more careful. As he said that, Suyi took out the food stored in the item, started to fill his stomach, and then rested. There is no daylight in the Valley of Miasma, and it is impossible to tell the time and weather outside. In the valley that is shrouded in miasma all year round, due to the dim environment, the visual distance is not very far. Coupled with the intricate piles of rocks and bones, this place makes people feel dizzy. Suyi, led by the big ferocious jaw dragon who was reluctantly willing to obey the instructions, came to a pile of corpses. There is the corpse of Fang Pterosaur. Suyi quickly identified the corpse and found the material he wanted. The corpses of these aromatic pterosaurs all fell here from the coral platform. Under the division between Suyi and Lu Sao, they peeled off the skin of the pterosaur from the body of the pterosaur that was not yet seriously decomposed. This material is the main material for building tents. After being tanned, it is waterproof and moisture-proof, making it tough and warm. Call. In the huge hollow above, another corpse fell from the coral platform high above. Suyi, meow. Something big fell down, meow. Lu Kao pointed at the huge black shadow that fell. Wow, it's actually the corpse of a Fengjiao dragon. Suyi turned around and looked, and it turned out to be the corpse of a huge flying dragon. Suyi walked forward and looked at the body of one of the top predators on the coral platform. It was seen that the body of the Fengjiao dragon was not as big as Suyi had imagined. The wing membrane was covered with tear-like scars, and there were several claw marks on the body that were deep enough to show bone. Thorns. No, this should be poisonous spines. On the coral terrace, the only ones that use poisonous spines are the female fire dragon subspecies, Sakura fire dragon. Suyi said, observing the traces carefully. Obviously, this might be a Fengjiao dragon that had just grown up, but it was killed by the poisonous hands of Sakura fire dragon. After all, the two sides are competitors, and it is common for them to fight over territory and food. What's more, this Fengjiao dragon is still immature, and the Sakura fire dragon does not mind strangling future competitors in the cradle. However, it happened to be an advantage for me. Although this material is a lot damaged, it is enough. Suyi rubbed his hands and took out a peeling knife to start peeling. Sudden. Clu la la la. The big ferocious jaw dragon suddenly let out a strange roar, and the nearby ferocious jaw dragon quickly gathered around to protect the big ferocious jaw dragon. What's wrong? Suyi immediately stood up and took a look. The great ferocious jaw dragon roared vigilantly towards a place, and in the dim yellow miasma, a dark red figure was approaching step by step, making a sniffing sound from its mouth. You again. Suyi was surprised at first when he saw the misty claw dragon appear, but after thinking about it for a moment, he took it for granted. The unique environment and terrain of Miasma Valley determine that most monsters here will not reject leftovers and carrion. The corpses that fall here from the coral platform every day are the buffet for the monsters in the Miasma Valley. The great ferocious jaw dragon knows this place where corpses fell, and there is no reason why the ferocious claw dragon doesn't know about it. Every dead body place is a restaurant for monsters, and monsters who are familiar with these places may come to try their luck. Obviously, this time, the misty claw dragon, Suyi and his party chose the same place where the corpse fell. This time is different from last time. I have the advantage. Big ferocious jaw dragon. Shake people. Suyi shouted. The big ferocious jaw dragon was obviously no match for the ferocious claw dragon. It raised its head, vibrated the vocal folds around its neck, and made a strange sound. Soon, many black shadows rustled around, and a dozen ferocious jaw dragons rushed here. Ying ying ying. The misty claw smelled a large number of scents and began to become restless. Then make it more lively. The big ferocious jackal dragon. Tickling the birds. Suyi released two accompanying beasts. For a time, 3 large monsters and a group of small monsters slowly surrounded the misty claw dragon. Ouch! Wow! Howl! For a time, many sounds bombarded each other in turn, and the entire place where the corpses fell instantly became noisy. The misty claw quickly turned its head left and right and looked around, waving its sharp claws anxiously. Click. Suyi loaded a pile of flints next to him into the projector, and then calmly observed the movements of the misty claw. Finally, hunger and anxiety made the misty claw unable to bear it any longer. It roared and quickly broke out towards a certain place. Suyi had quick eyes and quick hands, and launched a fire stone. In an instant, the flames exploded, and the misty claw dragon was suddenly frightened and paused. The moment when the ferocious claw dragon couldn't hold back and wanted to escape, it was a signal of its cowardice. The surrounding ferocious jawed dragons instantly swarmed up, opening their paralyzing teeth and biting at it. Ah! The cruel claw roared angrily, and its strong body twisted wildly, throwing the ferocious jawed dragon away one by one, but more ferocious jawed dragons continued to fly over. As the ferocious jawed dragon bites with paralyzing venom, the ferocious claw dragon gradually accumulates a state of paralysis. Big ferocious jawed dragon, use paralyzing venom. Suyi commanded. The great ferocious jawed dragon raised its head and spat a ball of yellow-green venom towards the ferocious claw dragon. Immediately, the paralyzing venom invaded the skin of the dragon claw, and the paralyzing venom accumulated by the dragon claws exploded together. The body of the dragon claw stiffened, and then the whole body flashed with electricity and twitched. What a great opportunity! The ferocious jackal dragon, dragon claws. Tickling the bird, heavy blow from the rock. Suyi commanded the accompanying beasts to swarm forward. Seeing the miserable besieged but unable to resist, Suyi suddenly had a bold idea in his mind. Why not take this opportunity to subdue the misty claw dragon? Ouch! But soon, the misty claw dragon broke free from the paralysis and stiffness. It roared angrily and swung its tough body like a whipcord, instantly getting rid of the bites of the monsters. Do it again. Paralyzing venom. The great ferocious jawed dragon opened its mouth, intending to repeat its same trick, but the ferocious claw dragon was also angry. It tensed its powerful muscles, leapt high into the air, and then swooped towards the great ferocious jawed dragon. So fast. Suyi saw the red phantom flash past, and the ferocious claw dragon had already pounced on the big ferocious jaw dragon. Bah! The great Duregnathus opened its mouth and bit fiercely, its sharp canines piercing the flesh without any hindrance. The great Duregnathus, which had just recovered from its serious injury, was injured again. Howling. The great Duregnathus howled in pain. Hurry and help it out! Suyi shouted. Although it looks like the weak claw dragon is under siege, if it launches a mad attack on one of the accompanying beasts, then it does have a chance to kill it in a short time. The big ferocious jackal dragon and the tickling bird immediately came to support, and immediately, 4 monsters were fighting together. The misty claw dragon used its rapid movements to dodge among the 3 monsters, its claws dancing wildly. It's a tough one. Suyi frowned and quickly thought about the strategy to win. And the fierce battle here quickly caused big trouble. Ah! A roar with a high nasal sound came from the sky, and the giant wings flapped the miasma to form a strong wind, roaring in the valley. Suyi raised his head and thought to himself that it was bad luck. Explosive scale dragon. Boom! The huge flying dragon suddenly descended, sending up a pile of corpses. Big ferocious jackal dragon, big ferocious jaw dragon, retreat with the body of Fengjiao dragon in their mouths. Suyi commanded, switching the ammunition in the projector. The 2 dragons roared low, each holding one side of the Fengjiaolong corpse in their mouths, and followed Suyi, who was riding on the bird, to escape. The explosive scale dragon immediately looked at Suyi and chased after him. That explosive scale dragon meow looks like the one from last time. Look at that scar, meow! Lu Kao shouted. Suyi looked back and saw a ferocious, charred black slash on the bronze mirror-like scales on the back of the explosive scale dragon. Being able to cause such injuries, Suyi immediately thought of Dragon Zan. Didn't the explosive scale dragon get involved in the battle between Black Horned Dragon and Dragon Zan? This explosive scale dragon looks like it could very well be that one. It's so haunting. Suyi immediately fired a flash bomb. Bah! The light flickered, and the explosive scale dragon that rushed toward Suyi was immediately hit. It stopped in its steps, squinted its eyes, and shook its head restlessly. On the other side, the misty claw sniffed the air, then quickly picked up a relatively intact body from the pile of bones, and finally fled from here quickly. Roar! Deep in the valley, the terrifying sound sounded again, as if it was also attracted by the noise here. Retreat! Su Yi shouted, and the two dragons ran away with Feng Piaolong's body in their mouths. After running hard for a long time, both dragons were out of breath. Su Yi panted and stopped. Looking around, there was a rather secluded small valley, and there was no trace of any monsters. Hurry up and strip the Feng Piaolong of its materials first, Su Yi said. Things like corpses cannot be put into items, they can only be broken down into materials. Big ferocious jackal dragon, come and help me break it down. Su Yi immediately directed the big ferocious jackal dragon to rough process the body. After breaking down the Feng Piaolong corpse into several parts, Su Yi took a stripping knife and started stripping the materials together with Lu Sao. Although the entire body of the wind-drifting dragon was severely damaged, fortunately the teeth and claws were not damaged. Other parts, such as skin, scales, wing membranes, bones and other materials, can be peeled off more or less. It is definitely not enough to build equipment for Su Yi, but it is no problem to dress Lu Sao up. This is the ice bag. Su Yi took out a frost-white organ like an organ from Feng Piaolong's chest. For a moment, a certain liquid in the ice bag gave off a cold feeling to his hands, and the surrounding water vapor quickly condensed into frost. Su Yi quickly put the ice bag into the item column, and then hugged the burning insect to keep warm for a while before he recovered. Hurry up and retreat. Su Yi listened to the faint roar coming from the Miasma Valley, quickly opened the map to find the way, and rushed back towards the temporary camp. The big ferocious jaw dragon on the side also wanted to eat the remains of the Fengjiao dragon, which made Su Yi say that it was hopeless. In the secluded valley, Su Yi and his party had already left, leaving only the broken remains of flesh and blood. Soon, a burst of heavy footsteps broke the silence here. Boom, boom, boom. A huge dark green figure walked into the valley, and soon it discovered the remains of the Fengjiaolong corpse. Crunch. The visitor did not despise the shredded corpse, but instead devoured it. The broken bones of the remains were also mixed with the minced meat and chewed up and swallowed. And this was obviously not enough for it to eat. It lowered its head to sniff the smell of the remaining powder, and then walked step by step in one direction. In the temporary camp, Su Yi built a simple grill using rocks and bones. He set up the meat of the herbivorous dragon and started grilling it. The ferocious jackal dragon that was used to it calmly waited for the barbecue. And when had the great ferocious jaw dragon, which had been eating leftovers and carrion all year round, seen this posture? He immediately stared at the tantalizing smell of barbecue, and saliva flowed out of the corners of his mouth unconsciously. Don't worry. Su Yi looked at the restless big jaw dragon, dumbfounded. Under the scorching fire, the meat of the herbivorous dragon was gradually cooked. Su Yi simply sprinkled some seasonings on it, and instantly, the aroma filled the camp. The big ferocious jackal dragon tore into pieces of meat and then tasted them carefully, while the big ferocious mandible dragon directly tore into the large pieces of meat with bones and eagerly swallowed them whole. Su Yi shook his head and sighed. Poor child, don't worry, there will be more in the future. Su Yi said and handed over a piece of barbecue again. The great ferocious jaw dragon listened to Su Yi's words and began to slow down the speed of eating meat and began to taste it carefully. The tender snowflake meat is grilled to bring out the aroma of fat and protein, the seasonings enrich the taste, and the skillful grilling techniques create a perfect texture. The great ferocious jaw dragon was instantly intoxicated. This barbecue was incomparable to the cold corpses and rotten meat that had fallen to the bottom of the valley. After eating such food, it simply did not want to eat those things again. Seeing this, Su Yi directly patted the head of the great ferocious jaw dragon and said proudly, "Be my little brother and eat delicious food and drink spicy food every day. Sooner or later, I will let you taste all the delicacies of the new world. So, feel free to hang out with me." The great ferocious jaw dragon thought for a while, and the temptation of Dun Dunxiang was too great, and where was the fight that was not a fight? The great jaws, who had acquired the Pokémon spirituality, figured it out instantly, and then nodded. Su Yi smiled and continued what he was doing. The newly peeled pterosaur skin had not been processed yet. Su Yi carefully scraped off the fat and other tissues on the skin, then simply washed it with water and put it on the grill to dry. Since there was really no tanning materials and conditions, Su Yi could only process the pterosaur skin in this simple way. Su Yi took off the dried and hardened pterosaur skin and began to sew the tent. With the help of the hunter's basic memory, Su Yi spent several hours stumbling to sew a simple tent cloth. Build a frame with bones, lay it with tent cloth, and then fasten it, and just like that, a simple camp is completed. Su Yi opened the hunting guide, and found that the camp here had been activated, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. How about trying the tent? Su Yi walked into the tent, took out the sleeping bag, put it away, and lay down in it. The tent made of fangy dragon skin was not only windproof, but also warm. After a while, Su Yi felt sleepy while lying in the sleeping bag. In the past few days, he had been running around with his injuries and had not had time to take a good rest. Now, although this unexpected trip to the Miasma Valley was bumpy, it also yielded good results. Su Yi opened the hunting guide, and turned to the accompanying beast page. Name: Great Ferocious Jaw Dragon. Race: Great Duregnathus male. Attribute: Dragon, evil. Characteristics: Extremely evil squad can call the ferocious jaw dragon to help it fight. Under the command of the holder of this characteristic, the ferocious jaw dragon's combat effectiveness is slightly improved. Moves: Paralyzing Venom, exclusive move, Power 20, electric attribute, special move, spitting venom that can put the opponent into a paralyzed state. When the paralysis state accumulates to the threshold, it will immediately put the opponent in a paralyzed and stiff state. Siege, bite, thunder and lightning teeth, etc. Obviously, the great ferocious jaw dragon can only display its characteristics in the Valley of Miasma, otherwise it will be an abnormal status hand. But as I said before, what Su Yi values is the ability of the great ferocious jaw dragon to drive the ferocious jaw dragon, which will facilitate his exploration in the Miasma Valley. Currently, the number of Su Yi's accompanying beasts and Pokémon has reached 7. The accompanying beasts include Jackalosaurus, Tickler, Natosaurus, Dewgrass, and the Pokémon include Lucky Egg, Burning Bug, and King Centipede. Except for King Centipede, who had no communication at all, the other members were all in combat mode, with just 6 of them at full strength. Turning to the mission page, the previous missions about the Barbarosaurus, Velociraptor and Steel Dragon disappeared automatically because no traces were collected within 3 days. This trip to the Valley of Miasma and the contact with monsters made Goldfinger once again have a new investigation report. When he opened the report, a new mission appeared. Mission: Capture the Misty Clawed Dragon. Mission support: None. Mission reward: 8 upper balls, 2 trap tools, and 3 target materials. Limited time: 5 days. Mission: Hunt the explosive scale dragon. Mission support: After the initial part destruction, support throwing 5 flash bombs and 1 paralysis trap. Mission reward: 15 upper balls, 5 trap tools, 2 ancient secret medicines, 3 target materials. Limited time: 10 days. Su Yi closed the golden finger and sighed. There is only hope for the mission of the Misery Claw Dragon. There is no need to think about hunting the explosive scale dragon. The 5 flash bombs and paralysis traps used in mission support cannot play a decisive role, let alone the prerequisite for destroying parts. But this time there is something new in the mission reward, which is the material of the mission target. This solves the embarrassment of being unable to peel off materials for Liu Kao to make equipment after capturing a monster. It doesn't matter that Su Yi himself is not the main force in the battle, but Mao Mao's equipment must be obtained. At present, after conquering the great ferocious jaw dragon, I have an abnormal condition player in my hand. I have obtained the materials of the Fengjiao dragon and the horns of the black horned dragon. I can at least make 2 weapons for Liu Kao and a set of Fengjiao dragon's armor. Although it was far from the original intention of going to the Big Ant Mound wasteland, it was still quite rewarding. Su Yi thought about how to capture the Misty Claw Dragon and gradually fell into sleep. In the dark valley of Miasma, I don't know what time it was, but Su Yi was woken up by a roar in the cave camp. Listening carefully at the edge of the camp, Su Yi judged the roar of the Misty Claw Dragon, and the other voice was the terrifying roar that had only been heard many times but not seen. Su Yi had already made a guess about the owner of the roar, and just needed to find evidence to confirm it. If you don't enter the tiger's den, you won't catch the tiger's cubs. Su Yi called Liu Kao, patted the 5 capture balls on his waist, and walked out of the camp cautiously. Miasma Valley is shrouded in miasma all year round, and the rocks are extremely dark in color. There is no beautiful scenery worth mentioning, and it is really incomparable with the ancient tree forest. Walking through the road lined with strange rocks and littered with corpses, Suyi was always wary of the miasmatic and dim surroundings. In my ears, the howling wind brought the aftertaste of a weird and terrifying roar. Suyi kept in mind his own history of making a fortune when the snipe and the clam competed with each other, and he planned to go and see if there were any opportunities and pick up any leaks along the way. His team is now considered to be of relatively high quality for Pokémon battles, but it is still far from enough to deal with most monsters in Monster Hunter World. Moreover, if Suyi wants to quickly establish a foothold in the Pokémon world, strong strength is essential, and powerful monsters are his shortcut. So he needs to seize any opportunity to add powerful companion beasts. When Suyi passed by the small valley where the body of Feng Piaolong was skinned, Suyi suddenly discovered that the flesh and bones shaved off that day had been eaten away, leaving messy traces on the ground. The guide insect on Suyi's waist clung to it. This trace. Suyi squatted on the ground and found the tooth fragment embedded in the scratches. That's right, it's that guy, the gluttonous king of terror, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Suyi also found three-pronged animal and dragon footprints around him, which was almost conclusive evidence. Okay, explosive scale dragon, Dino Tyrannosaurus, the old and new police are all here. This wave, it's a new police story. On the other side, Lu Kao seemed to have discovered something. Suyi meow. These scales look like those of the Misty Claw dragon. Lu Sao picked up a few broken dark red scales among the dead bones and rocks. Suyi took a closer look and saw that the claw was probably gone. The traces of the terror Tyrannosaurus and the broken scales of the Tyrannosaurus, are they in conflict? Suyi thought about the character of the Tyrannosaurus that was not afraid of anything that day, and even dared to bite the ancient dragon. It was really something it could do to fight against the Tyrannosaurus. Roar, howl. The brutal roar came with the wind in the valley. Let's go. Suyi immediately called Lu Sao to follow the sound. Unexpectedly, the sound of fighting stopped after a while. Suyi followed all the way, and couldn't help but worry that the Misty Claw dragon would not be killed. I still want to conquer it. Without sound guidance, we can only rely on the intermittent guidance of guide insects to follow the trail. The miasma around him became thicker, and Suyi once again stepped into a small valley with piles of corpses. It's just that the valley is extremely quiet at this moment. There is no noise from insects, ferocious jaw dragons and fancier dragons. There is only the crunching sound of Suyi stepping on the dead bones and carrion. Boom! Suddenly, a muffled sound sounded from above the valley. Suyi suddenly raised his head and looked at the surrounding rock walls. Boom! Suyi turned his head suddenly and locked his position. At a broken wall, several stones flew down. Call! A dark red figure suddenly flew out and hit the pile of bones far away from Suyi with a bang. It's Meow Claw! Lu Kao exclaimed. Suyi took a closer look and saw that the waist and abdomen of the Misty Claw dragon had been bitten with deep visible bone wounds. The dark red muscles were also inlaid with white teeth. It collapsed on the ground dying, its sharp claws twitching weakly. The ground was shaking, and he was about to die. Roar! The deafening roar made Suyi look up again. On the cliff, a huge dark green Tyrannosaurus looked down with its golden eyes, as if a predator at the top of the food chain was staring at weak prey. A generous gift crab, Suyi murmured. Boom! The 20-meter-long monster jumped down and landed with a crash. The valley trembled and withered bones flew up all over the sky. Boom! 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 The terror Tyrannosaurus walked slowly with heavy steps. Suyi followed the heart-shaking drumbeat and stepped back step by step. Lu Kao stuck to Suyi's side, and the hair on his body stood on end and trembled as he backed away. Can you imagine? A huge creature is less than 20 meters away from you. It can bite you in 2 or 3 steps. You are no taller than its calf. It can swallow you in one bite and chew you instantly like a cracker. Swallow it in pieces. In the eyes of the Tyrannosaurus, Suyi was just a snack, not even enough to chew a few times. Suyi immediately raised the projector that had been loaded with flash bombs and aimed at the ferocious head of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The moment the switch is pressed, behind Suyi, a high-pitched roar sounded, giant wings flapped, and miasma swept across. The Tyrannosaurus Rex immediately raised its gaze and looked behind Su Yi. Oh, Su Yi turned around and saw the sky-blocking figure of the explosive scale dragon slowly descending on the road behind him. Finally, 2 old and new police officers gathered here. Boom! The explosive scales dragon crashed down, blocking Su Yi's only escape route. Directly in front was the Terror Tyrannosaurus, and behind him was the explosive scales dragon. Su Yi and Lu Sao were suddenly sandwiched between 2 policemen. Howl! The Terror Tyrannosaurus immediately focused its attention on the explosive scale dragon of the same magnitude, and the explosive scale dragon, not to be outdone, let out a high-pitched roar. Ah! Su Yi and Lu Sao were caught in the middle, gritting their teeth and covering their ears. Aibo, you will use your size advantage to find opportunities to escape later. I will be ready to interfere with them at any time. Su Yi adjusted the projector, his muscles tensed, ready to take action at any time. The signal to start the war is the dragon chariot of the explosive scale dragon. I saw the explosive scale dragon spreading its wings and running towards the Terror Tyrannosaurus with both feet. Su Yi and Lu Sao immediately flew to the side, the giant wings passed over their heads, and the airflow swept over their bodies. The Terror Tyrannosaurus showed no sign of weakness, arched its front body, opened its sharp teeth and bit into the explosive scale dragon's neck. Boom! The explosive scale dragon knocked the Tyrannosaurus away at once. The Tyrannosaurus stepped on its feet, quickly stabilized its body, and then bit the explosive scale dragon's neck. Fiery white air spewed out from the nostrils of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and the muscles in its strong neck suddenly tightened. It twisted its neck, and the explosive scale dragon of the same size as itself was instantly picked up in its mouth. Su Yi, who had just climbed up, opened his mouth wide when he saw this scene. Seeing this scene in the game is completely incomparable to seeing it in person. The monster, which was longer than a bus, was violently lifted up. The strong wind howled past, and Su Yi couldn't help but narrow his eyes. This is the ultimate violence of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It is worthy of being a destroyer of the food chain. It is difficult for ordinary large monsters to test its edge. This is not the time to sigh. Aibo, run! Su Yi immediately pulled Lu Sao and ran toward the path of the explosive scale dragon. However, the explosive scale dragon is not a vegetarian. A blazing red light can be seen flashing between the scales on the explosive scale dragon's front body, and the explosive scales under its body also turn red and hot instantly. The next moment, the grenade-like exploding scales under his body suddenly exploded. The Terror Tyrannosaurus roared in pain and let go of its mouth after being blown away. The exploding scales dragon flapped its wings and fell back. With a bang, the claws of the explosive scale dragon hit hard in front of Su Yi's eyes, and a huge shadow instantly enveloped Su Yi. Unlucky, unlucky, unlucky! Su Yi yelled, pulling Lu Sao to the emergency brake. Roar! What never comes singly is that the Terror Tyrannosaurus took a step back to gather strength with its bowed legs, then took a hard step, jumped up high, and hit the explosive scale dragon from a distance. If this happened correctly, Su Yi would be crushed immediately into minced meat. At the critical moment, Su Yi came to his senses, hugged Lu Cao, raised the projector and fired the hook towards the distant rocks. Boom! The earth was trembling, and sand and gravel fell from the rock wall overhead. At the critical moment, Su Yi pulled the hook and escaped from the death trample of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Hoo-ha! Su Yi moved his trembling and numb legs, and his heart almost jumped out of his throat. Su Yi, meow! It's the meow-clawed dragon. Mau Mau pointed to the side, and saw not far away, the meow-clawed dragon was lying motionless in the corner, not knowing whether it was alive or dead. Su Yi looked at the Terror Tyrannosaurus, which was fighting fiercely with the explosive scale dragon not far away from the claw, gritted his teeth and ran over. The dead bones accumulated here all year round completely covered the ground, and the bones of different shapes made the ground rugged and extremely bumpy. The distance of 40 to 50 meters seemed extremely far away in the sound of the monsters running that shook the earth. Su Yi, be careful, meow! Lu Sao, who was following Su Yi, warned loudly. Su Yi swooped without thinking, and in the next moment, the powerful tail of the Tyrannosaurus Rex swept across his head. Su Yi got up on his hands and knees and took a moment to glance at the battlefield. He saw the Terror Tyrannosaurus and the explosive scale dragon fighting together again, and the battle circle began to move this way. This distance. Su Yi looked at the misty claw not far away. With his accuracy, it was still a bit difficult to catch the ball and hit it accurately. And just when Su Yi rushed forward again, a big foot hit nearby, and withered bones flew all over the ground. Su Yi was hit instantly, and the place where he was hit was extremely painful. But he just gritted his teeth and stepped into the pile of bones again. 1 step, 2 steps. On the stumbling road of bones, Su Yi quickly approached the misty claw dragon. But at this moment, the roar exploded, and the explosive scale dragon slammed into the rock wall next to Su Yi against the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The two monsters just stood across Su Yi's path. Roar! The Tyrannosaurus Rex furiously counterattacked, and the monster's huge body danced and flew around Su Yi, and the strong wind roared continuously. After narrowly escaping the fatal impact, Su Yi saw an opportunity and took a running shove, passing under the mouth of the terror Tyrannosaurus and the explosive scales of the explosive scale dragon. Close at hand, Su Yi took out the capture ball and aimed at the misty claw not far away. Boom! Cardiac arrest. The sharp claws crossed Su Yi's head and stepped on him. Su Yi protected his head and looked up. I saw the Tyrannosaurus lowering its head and noticing the little things running around. Not far away, the explosive scale dragon lost its balance and fell to the ground struggling. It was the Tyrannosaurus that actually gained some advantage. Roar! The dread Tyrannosaurus roared angrily at Su Yi, its foul breath assaulting Su Yi, and the roar ravaged his eardrums. Su Yi meow! Lu Sao screamed. Su Yi was roared from the front, facing the huge mouth of the abyss with rugged fangs. He was a little distracted for a moment, and his hands and feet were cold and weak. Howling! A tragic roar suddenly sounded, and at the critical moment, a dark red figure suddenly burst out. It turned out that the Tyrannosaurus, which had been silent just now, swooped up and clawed at the head of the Tyrannosaurus with its sharp claws. The ferocious claws of the Tyrannosaurus violently tore the face of the Tyrannosaurus, and the Tyrannosaurus shook its head angrily, trying to break away from the Tyrannosaurus. Saved! Su Yi immediately came to his senses and ran away from the Tyrannosaurus Rex. At this time, the exploding scale dragon stood up, then spread its wings and flew high. The next moment, the sky was filled with exploding scales waving down. Boom! The Tyrannosaurus accidentally hit its head against the rock wall, and the Tyrannosaurus on its head was knocked down instantly. The Tyrannosaurus Rex immediately struck back, opened its huge mouth to bite the Tyrannosaurus, and picked it up. In the sky, the explosive scale dragon finished spreading its explosive scales, and then swooped down towards the terror Tyrannosaurus. The terror Tyrannosaurus waved the claw in its mouth and threw it at the explosive scale dragon. Amidst the screams of the claw, the explosive scale dragon was intercepted in the air and staggered down. Misery claw dragon, miserable. Su Yi couldn't help but feel phantom pain all over his body just looking at it. Good opportunity, meow, Lu Kao reminded. The miscarriage dragon was falling in front of Su Yi at this moment. It must be conquered. Su Yi threw the catching ball with concentration. Boom! The capture ball hits the claw and is collected into the ball. On the other side, the explosive scale dragon stood firmly on the ground, then opened its mouth and spit out explosive flames. Hooray! Boom! In an instant, the explosive scales were ignited together with the surrounding miasma, and the explosive scales were detonated. After the miasma was ignited, the deflagrating flames detonated further explosive scales. Miasma and corpse oil fueled the flames. A heat wave swept across, setting fire to the prairie fire. For a moment, the entire valley turned into a sea of purgatory fire. Ahem! Where did the ball fly? Su Yi flapped his palms to drive away the flames and smoke, but the captured ball of the misty claw was blown away by the blast of air. What worries Su Yi even more is that Lu Sao doesn't know where he is. Aibo! Aibo! Where are you? Su Yi shouted in panic. The terror Tyrannosaurus roared in the fire, and the explosive scales dragon flew up again, roaring condescendingly, and the glands under its body once again condensed explosive scales. Their fighting is not affected at all. Ahem, meow here. In the fierce fire, a blackened figure rushed out holding a capture ball. Beautiful, Aibo. Su Yi was so pleasantly surprised that he breathed a sigh of relief, then hugged Lu Kao and ran toward the exit. With the cover of flames, Su Yi and Lu Sao fled the valley that turned into a sea of fire in embarrassment, leaving behind only the roar and shock that echoed in the valley. Hoo hoo hoo, Aibo, is it okay? Su Yi asked, panting. No problem, meow. The cat shook its body, and its originally cow-colored hair was dyed into black charcoal. It really scared me to death just now. Aibo, don't take such risks next time, no monster is as important as you. Su Yi said, carefully dusting Lu Cao. Lu Cao stretched her body, enjoying Su Yi's grooming, and said, okay, meow. But I'm very happy to be able to help Su Yi, meow. Su Yi sniffed, then smiled and rubbed Lu Cao's furry head. At the cave camp, Su Yi took out some water, washed his body briefly, and then immediately released the Misty Claw Dragon. At this moment, the Tyrannosaurus was in extremely miserable condition. The lacerations on its waist and abdomen were even more serious due to the second bite of the Tyrannosaurus. You could even see the internal organs inside from the wound. The belly was completely leaning on the parts that had not been bitten. Skin and flesh connected. If it weren't for the weak ups and downs in the chest and abdomen of the Misty Claw Dragon at this moment, Su Yi would have even thought it was dead. Su Yi quickly gave the vital Claw Dragon some vitality fragments, but the dying Claw couldn't swallow it at all. This is trouble. Su Yi quickly called out the Lucky Egg. Lucky. Gilly Egg was startled when he saw the injury of Claw. He had never seen any Pokémon injured like this. While the Auspicious Egg released the healing wave, Su Yi took out the wound medicine, needles and threads and bandages. Breathe, breathe. Su Yi took a deep breath, then picked up the suture. I have never had a wound sutured before, let alone such a serious injury. I can only rely on the wound suturing knowledge provided by Golden Finger in the Hunter's Basics. I am just trying to make ends meet. You have to hold on, brother Flathead of Miasma Valley. In the quiet cave camp, Su Yi concentrated on operating the needle and thread in his hand, and the sutures moved carefully between the skin and flesh. Su Yi didn't dare to go too fast, but he was extremely anxious about the injury of the Misty Claw Dragon. Lu Cao picked up the towel and thoughtfully helped Su Yi wipe the sweat from his forehead. The Auspicious Egg next to Lucky stopped releasing healing waves and sat down tiredly. It seems that the Claw has damaged its roots and fallen into a situation more dangerous than a near-death state, so the healing wave has little effect. Gilly Egg, Aibo, come and help, Su Yi said without raising his head. Okay, meow. Lu Cao washed his hands and walked to Su Yi. Lucky. Gilly Dan cheered up. Su Yi was too busy at the moment. The injury of the Misty Claw Dragon was really difficult to deal with alone. Gilly Dan, wipe away the blood from the Misty Claw Dragon. Aibo, spray the wound medicine on the sutured wound. Su Yi directed while continuing to suture the wound. Mao Mao and Gilly Dan each performed their duties and helped Su Yi treat the wound. At this moment, the Misty Claw Dragon was motionless, its breath getting weaker and weaker. Aibo, help me release the burning bugs and tickling birds, Su Yi said. Okay, meow. Lu Cao took the capture ball from Su Yi's waist and released the scratching bird and burning bug. Tickling the birds, dig some rocks to make a stove, burn the insects, light a bonfire, Aibo, build a shelf and put up a pot to boil water. Under Su Yi's methodical command, the partners quickly moved into action and completed the task quickly. Su Yi held the needle and thread in his mouth and took out the peeling knife. After burning it several times on the campfire to disinfect it, he carefully used the knife to remove the tooth fragments embedded in the flesh, then cut off some rotten flesh, and then heated the Auspicious Eggs. The towel wiped away the blood, and Lu Cao immediately sprayed the wound medicine evenly. After treating the wound, Su Yi concentrated on sewing it up again. There is no sun or moon in the valley, and the hour is unknown. After an unknown amount of time, Su Yi finally stopped trembling and numbing hands. Phew, the suturing is done. Su Yi twisted his stiff neck and stood up. At that moment, Su Yi immediately felt his feet numb and dizzy. How long have I been squatting? Su Yi quickly moved his body, and Lu Cao thoughtfully handed him a cup of hot water. Su Yi relieved his fatigue and checked the condition of the dragon claw again. He saw that the dragon was still very angry, but its injuries were not so ugly, and its abdomen was no longer bleeding profusely. As long as I regain some mobility and can eat, it will be easy, Su Yi said. At this moment, the dragon claw was motionless, and even the vitality fragments and recovery medicine could not be fed into it. If he was forced to feed it, he was afraid of choking the trachea. Su Yi was very afraid that a small mistake would send the dragon claw away. Su Yi was afraid that before he could return to Master Ma's martial arts gym, Misty Claw would die in his ball, so he did not choose to return to the Pokemon world, but instead treated the injury here urgently, and there were no Pokemon on the Island of Armor Center. The current solution is the best result Su Yi can think of at the moment. All that remains is to see whether the Misty Claw can survive the weakness of blood loss and prevent the wound from getting infected. Su Yi released 3 accompanying beasts. You guys work hard and take turns guarding the Misty Claw dragon. Let's take a rest first. After Su Yi finished speaking, he took Dewgrass and Lucky Egg back to the tent to rest. Howl, it's the voice of the great Duregnathosaurus. Su Yi quickly stood up and rushed out of the tent, only to see the big ferocious jackal dragon and the scratchy bird also woke up, while the big ferocious jaw dragon looked at the ferocious claw dragon vigilantly. Hoochie. The Misty Claw seemed to be out of danger at this moment, but it was extremely weak and still couldn't move freely. It lay on the ground, breathing hard, looking at Su Yi and his party with vigilance in its eyes. You're feeling better. Seeing this situation, Su Yi breathed a sigh of relief. I know you are a little confused about the situation now. After all, after experiencing something like that, you have escaped from the gate of hell. However, please don't worry, I won't hurt you. Please eat this, for your sake the injury is good. Su Yi stepped forward and handed over the vitality fragment. At this distance, as long as the Misery Claw Dragon exerts its last bit of strength, it can inflict fatal damage to Su Yi. At this moment, Su Yi had a fist in one hand and his palms were sweating. The 3 accompanying beasts beside him were also tense, ready to take action at any time. The Misty Claw Dragon looked at Su Yi, then looked down at the bandages and sutures on his abdomen, as well as a pile of empty medicine bottles and bloody gauze beside it. It had gained spirituality and seemed to understand something. Your injury is not completely healed yet, so you need these things. Su Yi took another tentative step and handed over the vitality fragment in his hand. Call. The Misty Claw slowly poked its head out and approached the vitality fragment. Its nose twitched, but it couldn't smell what it was. Eat it, you'll get better soon. Su Yi took the initiative to hand it over again, his hand just a stone's throw away from the mouth of the dragon claw. The miserable claw dragon looked at Su Yi and saw sincerity and expectation in Su Yi's eyes. Finally, the Misty Claw stretched out its tongue and licked the vitality fragments into its belly. Suddenly, a warm current spread from the abdomen, and the feeling of weakness dissipated a lot in an instant. The body began to recover under the power of the vitality fragments, and at the same time, the desire for food resurfaced. Feeling the improvement in his body, the Misty Claw Dragon knew that Su Yi had not lied to him. You feel hungry, I'll get ready now. Hearing the roaring sound of the Misty Claw's belly, Su Yi immediately stood up, took out the ingredients and started cooking. The minced meat was put into the beaten egg liquid and steamed until cooked. Su Yi mashed the minced meat custard, and then spooned it to the miserable claw dragon. The fragrance of fresh meat brought with it the mellow taste of eggs, and the Misty Claw gorged on finely chopped food that was easy to digest. A sufficient portion of minced meat custard was quickly finished. Feeling the food and clothing in its belly, the Misty Claw Dragon immediately relaxed. Do you have some strength? Let me change your dressing first. Su Yi took the last medicine and bandages and approached the Misty Claw Dragon. The Misty Claw Dragon looked at the medicine in Su Yi's hand, slowly lay down and exposed its abdomen to him. Thank you for trusting me. Su Yi smiled, then squatted down and carefully removed the bandage and changed the dressing. The Misty Claw remained silent, looking sideways as Su Yi carefully sprayed the wound medicine evenly, and then carefully wrapped the bandage. Okay, all that's left is to eat well, sleep well, and recuperate. Would you like to rest in the ball? The environment there may be quieter and suitable for recuperation. Su Yi took out the ball captured by the Misty Claw and asked. The Misty Claw shook his head and lay down on the ground to rest. Okay, Su Yi had no choice but to turn around and continue preparing food for other friends. Beside the bonfire, Su Yi distributed the carefully prepared food to the accompanying beasts, then carried the food himself and enjoyed a rare peaceful mealtime with Lu Cow and Geely Egg. The Misty Claw tilted its head slightly and looked towards the campfire. The big fierce jackal was enjoying the barbecue piece by piece, not in a hurry. The scratching bird held the egg custard and savored it one bite at a time, while the big fierce jaw dragon was enjoying the meat with bones. Nibbling. Su Yi put a piece of sashimi fish steak in the bowl into Lu Xiao's bowl, and then praised him a few times. Lucky Egg always seemed to be happy. The Misty Claw smacked its lips, recalling the fine and dense meat custard, and then looked at the carefully bandaged wound on its abdomen, then lay on the ground with peace of mind, and soon fell asleep. Chapter 51. After a simple meal, Su Yi looked at the Misty Claw and saw it lying quietly on the ground, breathing evenly and falling asleep. Su Yi couldn't help but sigh. The power of Pokémon is really amazing. If it were an ordinary monster, it would take at least 10 days and a half to recover from this injury. However, after gaining the power of the Pokémon, Tornado only took a piece of Vitality Fragment, and with the help of some wound medicine, he was out of danger in less than a day and was able to move around easily. Su Yi estimated that it would take less than 2 weeks for the Misty Claw to fully recover. It's just that the expenses after this may be huge. Su Yi sighed looking at the empty bottles of medicine lying on the ground. The injuries caused by the monsters' attacks were so great that several bottles of the wound medicine used on Pokémon were needed to cover their wounds. Su Yi bought more than 10 bottles of wound medicine, but all of them were used up just by spraying the wounds on the 4 accompanying beasts. It hasn't been a week since he bought those items at Kaidao Station, and they are almost used up, and Su Yi doesn't have much money now. Is it possible that we have to pick up garbage on Kai Island? Su Yi touched his chin. How about selling some of the mines from Monster Hunter World? Su Yi thought about it carefully, and then immediately rejected the plan. No, those are for making equipment for Aibo, and it's hard to say whether people in the Pokémon world recognize those mines. It seems we still have to rely on picking up trash. I just don't know if the guide insect can help me find materials and props in the Pokémon world. Su Yi started to think about it. In the tent, Su Yi turned on the flashlight and opened Goldfinger's hunting guide. Because the Misty Claw dragon was captured, one of the missions has been completed. 8 upper balls, 2 trap tools, and 3 materials have been placed on the items page. Upper ball. A more advanced capture ball, which can effectively capture stronger monsters. Equivalent to a super ball. Su Yi took out the upper ball. Sure enough, it was exactly the same as the super ball in the elf ball, which was only 1 level higher than the ordinary elf ball. At this moment, Su Yi's number of catch balls is 5 catch balls and 8 upper balls. Finally, the problem of Su Yi's shortage of captured balls was alleviated. Don't use the capture ball given by Goldfinger indiscriminately. The capture ball given by Goldfinger through Quest can capture both monsters and Pokémon. However, the Pokeball in the Pokémon world can only capture Pokémon, not monsters. It may be because the monster does not have the characteristics and power of the Pokémon before it is subdued, so the Pokeball is ineffective against the monster. But this also reflects the specialness and importance of the capture ball. It can not only conquer monsters, but also can cooperate with the Golden Finger to give the conquered monsters the magical power and wisdom of Pokémon. The next step is to give me the materials for the Dragon Claw, which are the claws, scales and teeth of the Dragon Claw. Now Aibo would like to bring a set of the Dragon Claw. Su Yi took out the materials and looked at them carefully. The grooved claws of the Dragon Claw glistened with cold light. The scale material was a large piece of dark red fine scales, and the tooth material was the largest canine among the teeth of the Dragon Claw. Su Yi was very satisfied with the results of this mission. The biggest gain, of course, was conquering the Misty Claw Dragon. Name: Misty Claw Dragon. Race: Misty Claw Male. Attributes: Dragon, Fighting. Characteristics: Miserable Claws. Claw attacks have a chance to give the target a lacerated state. Every time a target in the lacerated state takes a relatively large action, it will trigger a laceration damage. When actively attacked by the holder of this characteristic, it will be in the lacerated state. The target in the lacerated state will randomly receive 2 to 5 laceration damage. The target in the lacerated state can stop moving for 8 seconds to release the state. Move: Laceration Claw. Exclusive move, Power 85, Fighting attribute, Physical move, gives the target a laceration state. If the target is already in this state, the number of times this move triggers laceration damage is increased to 4 to 10 times. Violent transformation. Exclusive moves, Fighting attributes, Changing moves, increase physical attack by 2 levels and speed by 2 levels, last for 3 minutes. After the end, the enhancement will be eliminated, the state will be exhausted, and the defense will be reduced by 2 levels: Bite, Dragon Claw, Tearing Claw, Iron Weight. This brutal characteristic, these 2 exclusive moves that can destroy the opponent to the utmost, perfectly fit the attack characteristics of the Misty Claw Dragon to tear apart the opponent. The Misery Claw Dragon has gained new power and has become fundamentally stronger. Su Yi couldn't help but sigh. Just like in Pokémon, some Pokémon gain new characteristics or new skills and take off directly. The Dragon Claw gained the power of Pokémon, completely stimulating the potential of its pair of claws. Once the Misty Claw recovers from its injuries, it can directly become the strongest player in the team. Open the Ecological Report page again, and you will find that the body length of the previously tamed Big Diregnathus was 1,128 centimeters, and the length of Dionysus was 1,480 centimeters. Although it is not as long as Dagon, it is still enough to feel oppressive. Time passed, and after the injury recovered a little, the Misty Claw, which had initial trust in Su Yi, finally entered the capture ball without repulsion. It's time to go back. Before coming back again, make all the preparations. Every time he explores, new deficiencies will be discovered. Su Yi not only needs to check for leaks and fill them, but also needs to nip them in the bud. Returning to the Pokémon world, Su Yi finally saw the long-lost sunshine. Su Yi opened his arms and stretched his body, and the feeling of being surrounded by a dark environment all day long was instantly dispelled. Let's go back to the martial arts hall first to make sure we're safe. Su Yi didn't know how long he had stayed in the Miasma Valley. He estimated that it should be at least 4 or 5 days, but don't let Master Ma and the others worry. Returning to the martial arts hall again, Su Yi became more familiar with it. I'm back safely. Su Yi entered the hall. It's Su Yi. You've been gone for 7 days. I thought something happened to you. And Mi breathed a sigh of relief when she saw Su Yi. Sorry, there were some accidents, but the result is good. Seeing Aunt Mai's worried look, Su Yi apologized. Su Yitsai, going out for adventure is an exciting way to exercise, but you must also balance work and rest, and pay attention to safety. Ma Shid said as he walked out of the room. Feeling the concern of Mr. and Mrs. Ma Shid, Su Yi smiled and said, "Thank you for your concern. Since we are back safely and have gained a lot, we will have a banquet to celebrate." Really? Listening to Su Yi's rather careless words, Ma Shid and his wife couldn't laugh or cry. I'm back. Huh, it smells so good. As soon as Kato entered the martial arts gym, she smelled the mouth-watering fragrance. After a day of training, she suddenly felt unbearably hungry. Hey, you're back at the right time, Kato, come and try my handiwork. Good things should be shared together, meow. Lu Kao brought the last dish to the table. Grilled and charred barbecued meat, fragrant tomato scrambled eggs, steaming butter stew, and attractively colored cheese-baked potatoes. Just looking at it makes you want to eat. Kato swallowed, pointed at the delicious food on the table, and asked in surprise, Su Yi, you did all this? Su Yi took off his apron and said with a smile, not a good reception. Sit in the bright restaurant and enjoy sumptuous food in comfort without worrying about the monsters surrounding you. This is a good way to relax after an exciting adventure. Aibo, don't worry, there are plenty. Su Yi said to Lu Sao with a smile. It's so delicious, meow. Lu Kao said happily. Kato looked at the tempting stewed meat, decisively cut off a piece and put it in her mouth, chewing the satisfying chunks of tender meat, instantly dispelling the fatigue after exercise. If you continue to eat like this, the calories will exceed the standard. Kato looked at the golden cheese-baked potatoes. Although she wanted to eat them, she hesitated when she thought about the high calories. Kato, what's wrong? Don't you like it? Su Yi looked at Kato, who suddenly stopped and asked. No, the food is delicious, but the calories are too high. What are you afraid of? Going out for exercise and adventure, what can you do without high calories? Su Yi ate without caring. That's right. Seeing Su Yi and Lu Sao enjoying the food boldly, Kato swallowed, scooped up a piece of cheese potato, then put it in his mouth and slowly enjoyed it. Su Yi, what are your plans in the future? Kato asked suddenly while looking at the sumptuous dishes. Any plans? Su Yi paused. Well, actually I want to challenge the Alliance Conference. I have had this idea before, but I don't have the identity of the Alliance. Later, Emperor Dan promised to help me solve my identity problem, so I thought it was time. Alliance Conference. In our Galar, this event is a gym challenge. If you want to participate, you need a letter of recommendation. If Su Yi wants to participate in the gym challenge, I can give you a letter of recommendation. Kato said. In the Galar region, the gym challenge is a major event and ceremony. Different from the traditional regional conferences in several other regions, if you want to participate in the gym challenge in Galar, you need a letter of recommendation, and a letter of recommendation is usually issued by the gym leader, Champion Dandy, President Roz and other alliance members. Before the gym challenge begins, there will be an opening ceremony like the Olympics. Challengers and gym leaders will appear at the opening ceremony and officially announce the start of the gym challenge. And each gym challenge is like an Olympic competition. Challengers and gym leaders will compete in Pokémon battles in a huge arena in front of countless spectators. Finally, challengers who collect all 8 gym badges within the specified time will compete in the elimination round in the Grand Arena in Gongmin City. The final winner can qualify to challenge and compete for the championship. The whole process of the gym challenge was like a grand celebration, far more grand than conferences in other regions. Of course, Su Yi also knew this. Thank you very much. Su Yi naturally would not refuse the recommendation letter. I think Su Yi will definitely get a good ranking. Kato handed Su Yi a letter. I will do my best. Su Yi solemnly took the recommendation letter. Letters of recommendation are generally not given out easily, and sending a letter of recommendation means that the recommender recognizes the person being recommended. By the way, how much time is left for the gym challenge? Su Yi put away the recommendation letter, then suddenly thought of something, and asked nervously, "Don't be too late to participate." Kato suddenly said a little strangely, "This gym challenge has just ended, and the next gym challenge has not started yet." "Huh, it hasn't started yet." Su Yi was relieved at first, and then suddenly surprised. "Wait a minute, this gym challenge is over, so who is the champion?" Su Yi was suddenly a little surprised. "What time is it now? Xiaoji wouldn't have won the championship, right?" "Champion, no one has defeated Alchemy Emperor yet," Kato said. "Is that so?" Su Yi calmed down immediately. Xiaoji won the championship in the 8 Masters Championship, but Kato said that no one has defeated Dandy, which means that there has not been an 8 Masters Championship yet. So, when is the current time? Where is Xiaoji now? "Xiaoji, you didn't win the championship at all, who are you?" When Su Yi came to this world, he had not yet met the protagonist who was always 10 years old. Now, Su Yi is finally about to be born, and the truly vast world is just about to unfold before his eyes. How many Pokémon are there on the earth, in the ocean, and in the sky? What kind of story will he have with those people who only existed in images before? The once innocent dream of coming to the world of Pokémon has come true, and he breaks into this world with an unprecedented force. Adventure. Battle. The target is the Pokémon Master. Su Yi suddenly became excited. The feeling of the curtain rising gradually makes people look forward to it. Kato saw the flame in Su Yi's eyes, the flame full of passion and fighting spirit. After dinner, Su Yi was suddenly called out by Ma Shide. In the mountain stream behind the mountain, Ma Shide and Su Yi walked here leisurely. Master Ma put his hands behind his back and sighed. "Su Yizi, looking at you now, I feel like I saw the former Dan Emperor. Are you very adventurous?" Although Ma Shide asked, his tone was full of affirmation. Every time Su Yi came back, it was dusty, and this time he was even injured. But every time Su Yi had a happy smile and was always full of expectations for the next adventure. "I have been living in a haze before, like a walking zombie. This time, even in the face of danger, I have to carefully feel the beating of my heart. What's more, I have gradually gained many friends who trust me." Su Yi patted his waist. "Of catching the ball. It's great. At an age when you are capable, you can do what you like." Ma Shide said with a smile. "Did Master Ma come to chat with me?" Su Yi asked doubtfully. When people get old, they always want to entrust some things to others. After all, they have to serve the elderly. Ma Shide smiled, and then he took out the Pokémon balls and released the Pokémon inside. Grr! A humanoid gray bear jumped out with great momentum. "This is..." Su Yi looked at this Pokémon in surprise. He knew this Pokémon. It was the initial form that could evolve into Mast's iconic Pokémon, the martial arts Bear Master, the Bear Apprentice. I won't beat around the bush. I hope you will take good care of this child and let him see the vast world outside. Don't stay here on the island of armor with an old man like me. Ma Shid said. But why? Su Yi was extremely puzzled. Apprentice Shang should be an outstanding disciple of Ma Shid and be eligible to adopt him. He and Master Ma were not in a master-disciple relationship, so why did he suddenly entrust disciple Shang to him? Ma Shid smiled and said, when you received the recommendation letter, I saw your yearning for the outside world and felt your drive to move forward. I realized that we can't always abide by the previous rules. Our martial arts school has not recruited the next batch of students yet, and I am not sure whether any of the next batch of students will be qualified to receive the secret armor. Instead of waiting, it's better to leave it to you who is destined to shine. Su Yi was a little flattered for a moment. Grr. Apprentice Shang seemed to realize something when he saw Su Yi. He raised his head and looked at Su Yi with his timid but expectant eyes. Seeing this scene, Su Yi knew that if he said any pretentious words at this moment, he would look like a mother-in-law. Although they didn't get along for a long time, Ma Shid and his wife have always taken good care of Su Yi. Perhaps as Ma Shid said, he saw the shadow of Dan Emperor in Su Yi, so he planned to entrust the apprentice Shang to Su Yi. This is a kind of trust and expectation. Su Yi does not need to work hard to prove anything. It is Ma Shid's own judgment that Su Yi can do it. I will definitely take good care of apprentice Shang. Su Yi nodded solemnly and took apprentice Shang's elf ball. I believe you. Ma Shid smiled. Su Yi nodded and squatted down so that his eyes were level with that of disciple Shang. Apprentice Shang, do you like adventure? Grr. Disciple Shang tilted his head, a little confused. It means leaping between giant trees in the forest, hiking in the desert, exploring deep valleys, walking on beautiful mesas, and challenging the strong in the land of crystallization. Look at the sea under the sunset, look for treasures among the corals on land, pick delicious fruits in dangerous places, and soak in a hot spring in the ice and snow. It's an adventure like this, Su Yi said with a smile. Grr. At that moment, disciple Shang's eyes were full of longing. The martial arts studio in the early morning is quiet and peaceful. Oh, Su Yi, are you planning to come to the mainland? The image of Dan Emperor appeared on the intercom. Su Yi nodded and said with a smile, yes, I haven't seen the prosperity of Galar yet. Ha ha ha, everything here will make you fall in love with Galar. In this way, you can take a flying taxi directly to Gongmin City. Dan Emperor smiled. No problem. After confirming the meeting place, Su Yi hung up the phone. Su Yi Sai is about to leave. Ma Shid and his wife came over. Thank you for taking care of me during this period. I am very grateful. I will come back later. Su Yi thanked me. Young people can go wherever they want, but they have to pay attention to safety, Ma Shid said. Then I'm going. Su Yi and Lu Sao rode on the bird and headed to Kaidao Station. Arriving at the inn, Su Yi met Kato. Kato, are you leaving Kai Island too? Su Yi asked. Kato nodded and said, I've been out for a long time, and it's time to go back, otherwise President Roz will be verbose again. After that, if you are free, you can come to Sichuan town to find me. We have another battle. Kato held out his fist. Su Yi smiled and fist bumped with Kato. When the time comes, you have to go all out. I'm looking forward to it. Kato smiled. The steel-armored crow grabbed the carriage and slowly took off into the air. Su Yi and Lu Sao looked through the car window at the gradually smaller station and flew away from Kai Island in the strong wind. Gongmin City is the most prosperous city in Galar, with many high-rise buildings and busy traffic, full of modern atmosphere. The steel-armored crow slowly landed on the square in front of the Gongmin City arena. Guest, we're here. The uncle sitting on the back of the steel-armored crow and wearing goggles reminded him. Okay, thank you. Su Yi opened the car door and walked out with Lu Sao. As the sun fell, Su Yi raised his head and looked around at everything in front of him. A huge arena rose up in the center of the city. In the vast square, many people walked through the city with Pokémon of various forms. Busy, lively, crowded, and a completely different atmosphere from virgin forests and deep valleys, this is civilization and order. Meow. What is this? What a bustling stronghold, meow. Mao Mao's eyes widened and he looked around curiously. Aibo, this is not a stronghold, this is a city. This is a place where humans and Pokémon gather to live. There is no hunting and adventure, but colorful and busy traffic. Suyi sighed, finally arriving in a modern big city. I have almost forgotten this feeling. Meow, how can that thing run so fast? Meow. What kind of thing is that thing? Meow. Lucao, who had never seen high technology before, asked questions excitedly and curiously, while Suyi patiently explained each one. It's so magical, meow. Now, I finally have that feeling. Suyi, the other world you mentioned, meow. Lu Sao gradually felt like she was in a foreign land. It's amazing. Suyi couldn't help but sigh. His golden finger could not only lead him to experience the wilderness, but also lead him to experience civilization. Hey, Suyi, it seems you are not lost. A familiar voice sounded from behind. Suyi turned around and saw Emperor Dan descending slowly on the fire-breathing dragon. It's the champion Dan Emperor. Emperor Dan is here. The appearance of Dan Emperor instantly attracted the attention of the people around him. The extremely popular Dan Emperor in Galar immediately attracted the attention of people around him. Thank you everyone. Dan Emperor walked over while greeting the people around him in an approachable manner. I think you got lost. Suyi teased, it must be the road led by the fire-breathing dragon. Ouch! Charizard spread its claws. Ha ha ha, it's all because Gongman City is so prosperous. Emperor Dan smiled nonchalantly. Suyi, come with me. I'll take you to meet President Luozi. He is also very interested in you. Dan Emperor said. Dandy did not go to the Lord's building, but came to a certain restaurant and entered a private room. A cold-eyed woman in high heels stands behind a fat man in casual clothes. This is President Roz, and this is his secretary, Ms. Olivia. Dandy introduced. Are you the interesting person that Emperor Dan mentioned? The traveler with a Pokémon he has never seen before, Suyi. President Roz, who was wearing casual clothes, said with interest. First meeting, President of the Galar Pokémon Alliance. Suyi said in a neither humble nor overbearing tone. I heard that you come from a place with unique Pokémon. Is the Pokémon next to you unique to a certain place? I've never seen it before. President Roz observed Lucao with interest. Meow. Lucao felt a little uncomfortable. Suyi stepped forward to block Rozzy's view and said, I am an adventurer and have traveled to some strange places. I see, the world is very big, and there are still unknown things. President Roz did not inquire into the details, but went straight to the topic. Did Emperor told me about your matter. Since it was Dan Emperor who came forward in person, I also believe in the champion's judgment. This identity card is universal for the Alliance, and one card has multiple uses. President Lotz placed a magnetic card on the table. He pushed towards Suyi. Suyi took the magnetic card and thanked him. Thank you, President Roz, and thank you, Emperor Dan. I hope that the arrival of Sir Suyi will bring new things to Galar. President Roz said meaningfully. Suyi frowned, a little confused. President Rhodes is obviously a busy man. After having a simple lunch together, Olivia, as the secretary, unceremoniously urged Rhodes to carry out the next plan. Sorry, although I really want to continue chatting about your adventure stories with Mr. Suyi, but I am really busy with official business. President Lotz apologized politely. It's okay, I would like to thank President Roz for his help. Suyi said. Then I'll take my leave first. After President Roz left, Dandy said to Suyi, President Roz has paid a lot for Galar. It is because of Chairman Roz's efforts that this palace city has become the prosperous Pokémon competition it is today, Central. President Roz is indeed a dedicated person. Suyi said. Although he is the big boss of the main line of the game. If Emperor Dan is the superstar and spiritual pillar of Galar, then President Roz is the founder of Galar's prosperity. In the early years, it was Roz who collaborated with Dr. Mulan to develop the Dynamax wristband, a prop capable of autonomous Dynamaxing. They took this as an opportunity to make Dynamaxing and gym challenges the characteristics of Galar and became world famous. It can be said that the current prosperity of Galar is largely due to the chairman of the Galar Alliance and the president of the Malacoman Group. And what's interesting is that the openings of all previous Pokémon games almost always feature an introduction to Pokémon's background by the Pokémon doctor in the area. But this generation of Sword and Shield was introduced by the main boss, President Roz. And what mistakes did President Rotz make later? He is headstrong and arbitrary, just like all the bosses in the past. He wanted to use the mythical beast, but he underestimated the power of the mythical beast. President, you seem to be very interested in that young man. Olivia asked in the flying taxi. President Lotz smiled and said, there are two aspects. First, of course, Emperor Dan is very optimistic about him, and Emperor Dan actually plans to give a letter of recommendation to that person named Su Yi. I haven't seen him give a letter of recommendation to anyone for a long time. Over the years, Emperor Dan has maintained an invincible attitude, but in fact, he is also very eager to have an opponent who can defeat him. To make him interested, that young man must have extraordinary potential. I trust the champion's judgment. And the second point is that person's identity. Olivia wondered, is that person's identity very special? Roz smiled and said, no, it's because he has no identity. To be precise, he is not in the entire Alliance's identity library, and he has at least 3 Pokémon that are not in the Alliance's illustrated book at all. Do you know what this means? He comes from a place we don't know, President Lord Lotz said with interest. He first appeared on Armor Island. Does that mean that there are areas near our Galar that we haven't discovered yet? New areas and new Pokémon represent new possibilities and opportunities. Although Galar is already very prosperous, it is also at a bottleneck. If you want to break through the bottleneck, you may need to find another way. So, I said to him, hopefully he can bring something new to the table. After saying so much, Roz smiled nonchalantly and said, anyway, this is just a casual move. I encountered something interesting while taking a break from my busy schedule. Olivia praised, the president is always so thoughtful. At this moment, Su Yi didn't know that Roz had thought so much about his identity and origin. But Su Yi didn't care about other people's speculations about him. As long as they didn't interfere with him, those speculations didn't matter. He just wanted to enjoy adventure and travel. Just when Dan Emperor wanted to take Su Yi to visit Gungman Market, an unexpected person found Dan Emperor. Woof woof. A calling dog ran to Dan Emperor's feet and shouted as if to say hello to him. Emperor Dan, this is. A young and beautiful girl came over. Dandy smiled and introduced. This is a new friend of mine who is also my fellow junior. His name is Su Yi. He has Pokémon that you have never seen before. By the way, this is Sonia, the granddaughter of Dr. Mulan, the Pokémon doctor in the Galar region. Dandy introduced to Su Yi. Still your childhood sweetheart. Su Yi smiled and said, hello. Hello, meow. Lu Kao waved his paw. What kind of Pokémon is this? It's so cute. The cute Elu cat immediately attracted Sonia's attention. She knelt down and observed the Lu Kao carefully. Ahem, since someone is looking for you, then Dan Emperor, just go and entertain them. I will go shopping with my friends. When you go shopping with a champion, fans will almost block the road. Su Yi Led smiled meaningfully. But you are not familiar with this place. Emperor Dan hesitated. I'm not a 3-year-old child. Okay, I came here specifically to see you, Su Yi said, waving his hand and planning to leave. Okay, this Rotom phone is equipped with a Pokémon Pokédex and some basic functions. It contains my phone number. If you need anything, please contact me. Dandy took out a mobile phone with a Rotom pattern. Didi. Rotom on the back of the phone opened his eyes. It's a pleasure to serve you, Lotto. By the way, you will take me on a trip, right? I don't want to be stuffed in my bag all day, Lotto. There was a hint of curiosity and expectation in the tone of Lotto on the mobile phone. Dandy smiled bitterly and said, it's just that this Rotom may be a little too lively. Su Yi took the Rotom phone with great interest and said, it doesn't matter, it's not bad to say this. My name is Su Yi. Please give me your advice in the future. Put it on me, Lotto. Lottom smiled happily, and then flew into the side pocket of Su Yi's backpack. Thank you so much, Emperor Dan, for always helping me like this. I'm a little embarrassed, Su Yi said sheepishly. Every help that Emperor Dan gave him was very important to him. It's okay. After all, you are also my fellow junior. Emperor Dan smiled. Then I won't disturb you for now. Have a nice date, Su Yi said, dragging Lu Sao and running away. He didn't want to be a light bulb. Your friend is really interesting. Sonia smiled. It's a pity that I can't let you see his Pokémon. They are really unique. Dandy said regretfully. There will be opportunities later. There is a store nearby, we can. The two quickly merged into the crowd. Come out, everyone. Coming to a wide place, Suyi released the Pokémon. The burning bug was held in his arms, with the auspicious egg and the bear apprentice on the left and right, and the dewgrass behind him. Jaihu. Burning bug looked at the people coming and going in the bustling streets. Although he was a little timid, he couldn't help but look around curiously. Disciple Shang looked as if he was eye-opening. Let's go. I'll take you around this modern city today. Suyi led a group of cuties and ran happily towards the lively place. Although the gym challenge has come to an end, the remaining enthusiasm will not dissipate for a long time. Gongmin City is the center of the event, and people's enthusiasm for the gym challenge is still overflowing. Is there any gathering over there? It's so lively, let's go and have a look. Little guys, follow me, don't get lost. Suyi led his friends into a lively gathering place. The merchants here set up tents and sold Pokemon-related peripherals in a lively atmosphere, while many tourists were happily browsing the dazzling array of merchandise. What kind of cat is this? Lu Kao asked curiously, pointing to a dessert stall. This is ice cream, an icy and sweet dessert. Suyi saw the little ones eagerly staring at the colorful and delicious ice cream, and suddenly understood. Boss, 5 servings of ice cream. Okay. There is no system of the 4 heavenly kings in the Galar region. Instead, there are 10 gym leaders, and each gym leader has a certain number of fans. When Suyi visited a stall, he discovered that the stall owner had actually made exquisite cards like alliance cards with photos of each gym leader during the battle in the arena. Moreover, this stall owner's timing of taking photos is very good, and he can always capture the handsome or graceful moments of the stall owners. Here, have you obtained the right to use someone else's portrait? Suyi complained as he flipped through the unique cards. It feels like the fake cards sold at the small shop in front of the school when I was a child. You want the right to the image, and I also want it. Do you want it or not? The stall owner looked impatient. Suyi quickly picked out a dozen Kato and Lulina's cards, slapped them on the table, and said decisively, I want all of these. The stall owner smiled disdainfully and said, Ha! Man. As he said that, the stall owner packed it up quickly. Just when Suyi put away the small card with satisfaction, there was a sound under his feet. Chant. Suyi lowered his head and saw a rat-like Pokemon with yellow, brown and black patterns looking up at him with a smile. It's Molubike, the 8th generation electric mouse. Suyi knelt down and looked at this cute electric mouse curiously. Unexpectedly, the electric mouse, which was cute just now, suddenly changed its face, the patterns on its body turned purple and black, and its expression became fierce. What's wrong? He looks hungry. Pokemon like Moribek have 2 forms when they are full and hungry. Their main function is to affect the attributes of their exclusive moves. And outside of battle, the hungry form is Ba, Ba. The extremely hungry Molubike flashed his body and took away all the ice cream from Suyi and his party. Ah, Morubiko stuffed 5 ice cream sticks into his mouth. My ice cream meow. Lu Kao wailed. Grr. Disciple Shang shouted angrily, putting his hands in a fighting stance. Hey, Morubiko, who had regained his full stomach, once again put on a cute smile and raised a hand, as if to say, thank you for the treat. Suyi was speechless for a moment. You're such an electric rat, you're a bit over the top. Molubiki. At this moment, a voice called out urgently. Hey, Moribek heard the sound and immediately jumped on his legs and ran towards the visitor. Morubiko, you. The girl looked at the smear of ice cream on the corner of Morubiko's mouth in her arms, and she immediately understood something as she was familiar with Molubiko's characteristics. She looked up and looked ahead. Next to a tall young man, several Pokemon looked angrily at Molubik in her arms. I'm sorry, my Morub has caused you trouble. I will compensate for the damage caused. The girl in front of her, who was dressed in a punk style with a rather punk style hairstyle, bowed and apologized. You are. Suyi was a little surprised, because this person was an acquaintance, of course, in the game. The girl holding Morubiko in front of her is the sister of Nizi, the leader of the Spike Suppression Gym, Ma Li, who is also one of the game's protagonist rivals. On the bench outside the meeting, Suyi bought another ice cream for each of the little ones. Here, Suyi handed 2 ice creams to Ma Li and Molubik. Hey, Morabik happily took it. Molubike, you have to apologize properly and then thank me. Ma Li educated. Hey, Morubiko smiled and bowed, and then immediately started eating. Really? Ma Li said helplessly. What a naughty guy, Su Yi said with a smile. The transformation of form is a characteristic and cannot be controlled by Molubiki. This requires the trainer to pay attention to its status at all times. Su Yi did not blame it too much. Thank you, this one. After having the experience of being called uncle by Ma Shi's son Haig, Su Yi immediately introduced himself. My name is Su Yi. I am still very young. I come from Kai Island. Thank you, brother Su Yi. It was obviously me who caused your loss, but in the end you spent the money to treat us to ice cream. Ma Li thanked her, trying hard to squeeze out a smile on her lovely face that was used to keeping her emotions and anger hidden. Go ahead, Ma Li is so cute. Ahem, I'm not that petty, so I just want to make friends. Su Yi said nonchalantly. Su Yi, you are here, are you making friends? At this time, Dan Emperor and Sonia came from not far away. Are you done shopping? Su Yi looked disappointed. I gave you a chance but you didn't use it, Dan Emperor. I'm mainly here to tell you something and invite you by the way. Emperor Dan smiled. Invite me. Su Yi was confused. Yes, it is my brother Hepu's birthday in a few days. I will go back to Hualang town to celebrate him. I also want to invite you to join me and prepare a program for him. Dandy explained. Program, no problem. Su Yi agreed immediately. He also wanted to meet the #1 rival in the game, the braided sheep Jinchuriki. With this flying taxi card, you can take a steel-armored crow taxi at will in Galar. I have some things to do next, so I'll meet you in Hualang town then. Dandy handed Su Yi a magnetic card. Thank you, go and do your work. Su Yi thanked him. Sonia, what are your plans next? Dan Emperor asked Sonia. I made an appointment with Lulina to go shopping tomorrow. I will stay in Gongmin City today. Okay, if Su Yi has any questions, you can ask Sonia. She is an expert on Pokémon. After Dandy made arrangements, he left alone on the fire-breathing dragon. Hello, Su Yi, can I see your Pokémon? Sonia looked at the cat curiously again, and then asked with some expectation. It might not be convenient here. Su Yi looked at the crowd around him and said. Then follow me. Sonia thought for a while and said. In a park in Gongmin City, there is a wide field specially designed for passers-by to fight. Do you actually know Dan Emperor? Ma Li, who followed curiously, asked in surprise. We are the same disciple. After all, he was entrusted with apprentice Shang, so he was nominally Ma Shi's apprentice. You can't get to know each other without fighting. You actually fought against Dan Emperor. Ma Li said in surprise. Su Yi smiled and said, it's a pity that I lost that time, but I have added some more partners. I think the next battle is not far away. With that said, Su Yi took the Pokémon back, then switched the accompanying beast to battle mode, and finally took out the capture ball. Come out, my comrades. With the appearance of Su Yi's 4 accompanying beasts, the small venue that was not originally set up for the Dynamax battle instantly became crowded. Wow, what a big Pokémon, Sonia exclaimed in shock. The big ferocious jackal dragon lay there, just like a small truck, not to mention the longer dire claw dragon. The image was that of a ferocious beast that chooses people to eat. Compared with the two of them, Tickled Bird and Big Duregnathus are a bit like their younger brothers. Evil and powerful, Ma Li's eyes lit up as she looked at the big ferocious jackal dragon and the big ferocious jaw dragon. The sister of the owner of the evil hall really has a unique aesthetic, and the 2 accompanying beasts also happen to have the evil element. But when they suddenly appeared in a bright and spacious place, it was fine for the Jackalosaurus and the tickling bird. However, the Duregnathosaurus and the Clawsaurus, which had been living in the dim valley of Miasma all year round, found it difficult to adapt. No, the big ferocious jaw dragon is a little restless, but because Su Yi conquered it through fighting, and for the big ferocious jaw dragon, Su Yi is now its boss, the big ferocious jaw dragon is quite restrained, and it is slowly working hard to adapt. Ouch, but the misty claw dragon was different. It still maintained its wild and ferocious nature and screamed in surprise. Then it twitched its nose and smelled a smell that was completely different from the Miasma Valley. It let out a threatening growl. Mobai, Malubike, who was standing aside, was startled, and then quickly hid in Ma Li's arms. Suyi, hasn't it been long since you tamed this Pokémon? Sonia immediately saw the problem. Yes, and to be precise, it was not conquered through fighting. Suyi said and hurried to the side of the Misty Claw Dragon. Don't be nervous. No one will hurt you here, and there is no danger. I'm right here. Suyi stroked the head of the Misty Claw Dragon and comforted him patiently. The Misty Claw moved its nose and smelled Suyi's scent, so he relaxed a little bit of his nervousness, but his expression was still vigilant. Get used to it slowly. Suyi knew that there was no rush. Although you have recently conquered a Pokémon, I surprisingly trust you, Suyi. Sonia said with admiration. Such a large Pokémon, full of wildness and ferocity, quickly got rid of its anxiety and impatience under Suyi's comfort. This shows that Suyi has gained its trust and that it believes that Suyi can be relied on. Sonia didn't know what they had gone through, but she could tell that Suyi was sincere to these vicious-looking Pokémon, so he also gained the trust of these vicious beasts. It's really amazing, Sonia exclaimed. Have you gained the Pokémon's trust? Molly thought thoughtfully as she watched Suyi gradually calm down the Misty Claw and interact cordially with the Pokémon. Beep beep. New Pokémon found. The illustrated book is open, Lotto. The cell phone Rotom flew out from the side pocket of the backpack, and then pointed at the 4 accompanying beasts and opened the illustrated book. Beep. There is no information. Is it an unconfirmed Pokémon? Lotto. Rotom said in surprise on the mobile phone. Really? I thought the unseen Pokémon that Dan Emperor mentioned were Pokémon from other regions, but I didn't expect that it turned out to be an unconfirmed Pokémon. This is a major discovery. Sonia opened her own illustrated book and confirmed that these Pokémon were not in the entire league's illustrated book at all. Suyi, where were these Pokémon collected? Are there any tribes? What's the ecology like? Sonia asked with curiosity on her face. Although Sonia is not officially a doctor yet, but just an assistant to the doctor, she entered this field because of her strong interest in Pokémon. For everyone who studies Pokémon, Pokémon that has never been seen before is as attractive as a treasure waiting to be opened. Looking at Sonia, who looked like she was going to get to the bottom of it, Suyi was a little at a loss and said, "Well, Sonia, calm down. Sorry, I got excited when I saw so many unconfirmed Pokémon at once, but this is a big deal. Don't you plan to report it to the Alliance?" Sonia calmed down her excited interest and turned to doubt. Well, I'm sorry, I don't plan to publish this information now, because they are unique to this world, and I don't want them to be harmed. Suyi shook his head. Suyi was telling the truth. He was not yet powerful enough to deter those who coveted rare Pokémon. If he disclosed the news that he had rare Pokémon too early, he would definitely cause trouble. After listening to this, Sonia made up a lot of things in her head, and it was not her responsibility to record and report newly discovered Pokémon. Seeing what Suyi said, she stopped mentioning those official things. Sure enough, the world of Pokémon is still very mysterious, and there are many things we haven't discovered yet. Sonia couldn't help but sigh as she looked at the accompanying beasts of different shapes. Suyi, you are so lucky to meet so many novel Pokémon. Sonia said with envy. I'm indeed lucky to meet them. Suyi smiled and touched the heads of the accompanying beasts. I also feel very lucky to meet Su Yimiao. Lu Kao said happily. Can I meet a strong partner that I can trust? Seeing this scene, Molly suddenly felt the urge to conquer Pokémon. In order to make Spike Town prosperous again, I have always wanted to do something, so let's start by conquering Pokémon. I also want to meet a strong and trustworthy partner like him. Molly decided in her heart. Thank you for the ice cream. I'm going to leave. Let's exchange contact information. When I win over a reliable partner, I want to have a battle with you. Molly took out her smartphone and said while holding Morabik in her arms. No problem. Suyi smiled. Didi, contact information has been exchanged. Rotom approached Molly's phone and scanned it, completing the exchange of contact information. Goodbye then. Molly walked briskly on her way out of Gongmin City. The things she had been worrying about before unexpectedly got answers today. Seeing Molly leave, Sonia said, Suyi, I'll take my leave, too. Dan Emperor needs my help. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Of course, if you capture a new Pokémon, you must share it with me. Sonia said, and also exchanged contact information with Suyi. As Sonia left, Su Yi looked at the park where few people came due to the lively gathering outside, and always felt that he wanted to do something. What are we going to do next? Continue shopping, Su Yi murmured, looking at the still early sky. As expected, I couldn't sit still, watching characters who I only knew in the game express their emotions vividly and then go their separate ways. I want to take action too. Target. Lu Coral Platform. Su Yi found a secluded place in this park without stopping, and then chose to descend to the cave camp in Miasma Valley. Arriving at the cave camp again, the rocks surrounding him gave Su Yi a sense of security. Su Yi released the dewgrass and walked toward the exit along the gap in the rock wall. However, when Su Yi squatted and walked out of the low cave entrance, there was a surprise waiting for him. On the flat ground outside the cave, a huge dark green Tyrannosaurus was walking and sniffing the surrounding scent. When Su Yi got out of the hole, the terror Tyrannosaurus suddenly smelled a strange smell and turned his head to look. Su Yi, who had just stood up, happened to look into the golden dragon eyes. Roar! The terror Tyrannosaurus suddenly roared excitedly, and its terrifying head covered with long and thin scars suddenly raised and hit Su Yi hard. It's numb. Su Yi threw himself backwards, hurriedly crawled into the cave as if to escape, and immediately pushed out the grass behind his butt. Meow! Lu Kao was startled. Boom! The cave entrance shook suddenly, and the flying gravel hit Su Yi's back with a crackling sound. Su Yi looked back in embarrassment. At the entrance of the cave that could barely allow a person to squat and enter, the terror Tyrannosaurus, which had missed a single blow, turned its head sideways and looked into the cave with its golden, ferocious eyes. This scene feels quite like the famous scene from The Shining. Roar! Seeing Su Yi inside the cave, the Tyrannosaurus Rex hit the cave entrance with its head again, banging several times, and the whole cave suddenly trembled. But even so, only the rocks on the outside of the cave entrance were broken, and some fragments of the harder rocks inside were chipped away. Su Yi and Lu Sao quickly fled back into the cave space along the gap that was wide enough for one person. That must be the terror Tyrannosaurus that seriously injured the Tyrannosaurus, Su Yi said with lingering fear. The slender scars on the face of the Tyrannosaurus were undoubtedly caused by the last desperate counterattack of the Tyrannosaurus. I'm scared to death, meow. That scary guy is actually meowing outside the camp. Lu Kao felt her heart palpitate as she listened to the banging noise outside. Didi, Lotto, what kind of Pokémon was that just now? So terrifying. Rotom, the mobile phone in Su Yi's backpack, suddenly appeared and said in horror. Ha ha ha, welcome to the new world, Rotom. Su Yi laughed. Where is the new world? Why did you suddenly come to a place like this? Lotto. Rotom felt like his chip was going to smoke. You can think this is a different world, but can you please help me keep it secret from outsiders? Su Yi said. Another world. I can't understand Lotto. Wait, the network signal is gone too. We are really in an incredible place. Rotom said in surprise. Isn't this the trip you wanted? There will be more exciting ones later. Welcome to join our adventure. Ha 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 ha, Su Yi laughed. Got it. A secret adventure that no one knows about. I love it. Let's have a first commemoration. Lotto. Lottom excitedly spun around in the air, and then took a photo of the camp. I always feel that the addition of mobile Rotom will make the journey more exciting and interesting, Su Yi couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, there was still sound of hitting rocks outside the cave. Fortunately, the camp was chosen well, Su Yi said thankfully. If he had chosen one of the open areas in the game to set up a camp, he might have been invaded by some monster. Fortunately, there are many such caves on the rock wall in the Valley of Miasma, so Su Yi was able to find such a place to set up camp. It would be rude to keep chasing, Brother Gua, Su Yi said helplessly, listening to the sound outside that although the frequency had slowed down, was still being hit hard from time to time. But soon, the Tyrannosaurus Rex seemed to lose its patience, and the movement outside stopped. Let me see. There is a simple and effective way to verify whether the Tyrannosaurus Rex has left. Su Yi opened the hunting guide, and clicked to leave the world of monster hunting. It is being tracked and cannot return. Bang! Su Yi closed the hunting guide, and cursed secretly, you idiot. As expected, the Tyrannosaurus Rex was still outside the cave. It was unknown whether it was resting in place temporarily or squatting to guard Su Yi. In short, it still remembered Su Yi's scent and was on guard not far away. What kind of hatred or resentment is there? Su Yi was helpless. He didn't know why the Tyrannosaurus Rex had to compete with him, a snack that was not enough to fill his teeth. Is it because of grudge? Then why don't you go find the explosive scale dragon? I just wanted to explore with enthusiasm, but as soon as I went out, I was blocked by a Tyrannosaurus. It was really unlucky. And just when Su Yi was about to use flash bombs and stink bombs to rush out, Mao Mao made a discovery. Su Yi meow. There is a crack here, and there seems to be a road behind it, meow meow. Lu Kao looked into the gap in the rock wall somewhere in the cave. Let me see. Su Yi leaned over. At this time, Rotom turned on the flashlight of the mobile phone in time. Su Yi could see that the crack in the rock wall here extended outwards and gradually expanded to a width that could barely pass through. I can just pass through this gap. Let me go and check the situation, Lotto. Rotom volunteered on the mobile phone. It could be seen that it was already immersed in the atmosphere of adventure. Then please, Rotom. Su Yi nodded. The cell phone Rotom floated into the gap and then flew outside. A few minutes later, the Rotom came back. There is a passage outside that leads to the open area outside, but the environment here is so dark and gloomy, Lotto. Rotom said. It's good if you can access the outside. Come out, the fierce jackal dragon. Su Yi released the ferocious jackal dragon, pointed at the gap and said, cut it open with the dragon's claws. Ouch! The big ferocious jackal dragon waved its gleaming sharp claws, clanging a few times, widening the gap to a size that could barely allow people to pass through. Thank you. Su Yi took back the fierce jackal dragon. Ha ha ha, Brother Gua, this is my escape route. Goodbye. Su Yi got into the gap under the illumination of Rotom's flashlight. After squeezing out a short crack, there was a long and narrow rock tunnel. After walking for a while, the roar of water came to his ears. When Su Yi walked out of the tunnel, the scene in front of him suddenly became clear. In front of you is a fairly wide beach. In front of you, a huge waterfall flies down from a high place. The water flowing down from the coral platform washes away the rocks and huge dead bones, and finally merges into the dim river in front of you. I don't know where to rush into the valley of miasma. This scene is like a river of hell. What kind of Pokémon bone is that? It's so big, Lotto. Rotom clicked and took a picture of the huge skeleton. Is it the skeleton of the Snake King dragon? Su Yi was a little unsure for a moment. After all, this is the ancient dragon's cemetery, and it's really hard to tell who the skeleton belongs to. On the bank of the river, there was a dark red plant growing. Su Yi walked over curiously and said, is this the red-skinned fruit in the game? The plants in front of him had red fruits that looked like lychees. All the specialties in the game were represented by a simple icon, so Su Yi couldn't really tell what kind of fruit they were. So can this be eaten? Su Yi was a little hesitant. In the final analysis, it is still unclear whether these are the fruits in the game that can be used as food. And growing in such a place where corpses are everywhere and surrounded by miasma makes people feel a little uncomfortable no matter how they think about it. It's clean and hygienic, brothers. Su Yi hesitated again and again, but peeled off the red peel and threw the flesh like red dragon fruit inside into his mouth. I admire the first person to eat mushrooms, because they might be poisonous mushrooms. But Su Yi is lucky, he should be the first one to taste the specialty fruit of Miasma Valley. Yeah, it's sour and sweet, super delicious, Aibo, have one. Su Yi handed the fruit to Lu Kao. I want to try it, meow. Lu Kao opened the peel expectantly and put the pulp into her mouth. Meow. The cat said nothing, but was immersed in the strange taste of the fruit. The dark red flesh is very crisp, and the light sourness supports the sweetness. It makes people immersed in the mouthful of sourness and sweetness, making those who taste it want to savor it carefully. Is it really that delicious? It's a pity that I can only eat electricity, Lotto. Rotom said regretfully on the mobile phone. Pick them and leave them for everyone to taste together when the time comes. Share the good things together. Su Yi picked all the fruits that were tentatively thought to be miasma fruits and put them into the items. Okay, now we have to think about how to climb up. Su Yi looked up. Countless rock pillars of different sizes and slender peaks extend upward from the Miasma Valley, supporting the land coral platform above. Through the miasma-shrouded valley, one can vaguely see the scattered pieces of different sizes. Continental coral platform composed of well-organized platforms. There are vines here that can climb up some distance. Lu Kao pointed to the tough vines growing on the rock wall at the edge of the beach. Let's climb up a little first. Su Yi used the hook to climb up quickly. Ding! After a while, Su Yi hooked a huge fan blade bone and climbed up a slowly upward slope. This must be the remains of the Snake King. The ramp passage at Su Yi's feet was completely formed by the long bones of the Snake King dragon that accumulated and solidified soil and rocks over the years. Only the fan-shaped blade bones told of its former majesty. Just when Su Yi was looking at the remains, the guide insect on his waist fluttered onto a puddle of black oil covering the bones. Are the broken bones with tar attached to them the bone hammer dragon? Su Yi walked up the ramp and found driving traces full of holes. Osteosaurus, a guy covered in bones, raced on the bones of Osteosaurus all day long. And this guy doesn't fit Su Yi's aesthetics. Whether in the game or now, he doesn't really want to capture this guy. Come out, Sad Claw Dragon. Su Yi thought for a moment and released the Sad Claw Dragon. Ha! The Misty Claw exhaled, sniffing the familiar smell around it, which made it feel at ease. Misery Claw Dragon, you should know the way from Miasma Valley to Lu Coral Platform. Su Yi asked. Unlike the great Duregnathosaurus and Bone Hammer Dragon, which stay in the Miasma Valley all year round, Duregnathus has a very fast metabolism because it needs to maintain its highly mobile body, so it needs a lot of meat. However, there is little food in the Miasma Valley, and there are many carnivorous competitors. Relying on the corpses falling from the platform is too much luck, so the Misty Claw will go to the coral platform from time to time to look for food. Ouch! The Misty Claw Dragon nodded. Then please take us to Lu Coral Platform. Su Yi said. Ha! The miserable Claw Dragon breathed out, then crouched down and motioned for Su Yi to come up. Thanks. Su Yi smiled and turned over and climbed onto the back of the Misty Claw Dragon. Hiss. It's just that the horny hard protrusions on the back of the Misty Claw stuck in the crotch, which made Su Yi feel a little uncomfortable. Meow. Mau Mau was smart and grabbed Su Yi's back. Howl. The Misty Claw roared, its strong muscles tensed, and then it jumped hard and climbed up the surrounding rock wall. The Misty Claw jumped and climbed quickly on the rock wall. Su Yi clung to his back, feeling the rapid changes in the scenery. The protrusions on the rock wall and the small platforms on the edge of the rock pillars all became the springboards for the Dionysus. After climbing for a while, the Dionysus jumped onto the platform at the top of a rock pillar. At this moment, they were almost in the middle of the valley. Take a rest, Misty Claw Dragon, you are still injured. Su Yi signaled to take a rest. The dragon claw took a few breaths, then lay down to recover its strength. Su Yi took out some barbecue to replenish the dragon claw's energy. It's so high, Lotto. What kind of Pokémon does that huge skeleton belong to? Rotom flew out of his backpack and looked down at the valley below. At this moment, the weather on the Lu Coral Terrace must be very sunny, even scorching, because the bright sunlight shines through the miasma, making the Miasma Valley that is dim all year round a rare clearing up, and the broad field of vision coupled with clear visibility, let Su Yi and his party finally get a glimpse of the true appearance of the Miasma Valley. Huge skeletons snaked out from the rocky cliffs of the valley and were piled up in the canyon. Countless huge skeletons were scattered everywhere. Some were integrated with the strange mountains and rocks, turning into cliffs and domes, while others were sinking into the underworld, only the tip of the iceberg is exposed. This dragon cemetery seems to be chanting the afterglow of the last elegy of the ancient dragons. It's an indescribable feeling. Anyway, let's take a photo as a souvenir. Rotom's voice became softer, as if he didn't want to disturb the dragon's soul sleeping here. From eternity to the present, the Whale Falls of the ancient dragons have nurtured this world of bizarre creatures and free creatures. This land is worth exploring for a lifetime, Su Yi said with emotion. Just like the investigation team that came to this continent, until the arrival of the 5th phase team in the near future, they have been stationed here and accumulated strength for 40 years, just to explore this new continent, the mystery. And how many 40 years can a life last? 40 years have passed since young adults in their 20s came to this continent. Many people have spent most of their lives here, just to explore the secrets of Gulongdu and the ecology of the new world. They are true, like epic poems. The adventurer and pioneer in singing. And our adventure has just begun, Ibo. Su Yi said. Su Yi, I always feel so happy, meow. Lu Kao opened her bright eyes, admiring this strange but poignant scenery, just like when she and Su Yi climbed up the ancient tree forest to overlook the land. As Su Yi said, the adventure has just begun. Although it is a stunning scenery, their goal is still above. After getting enough rest, Su Yi and Lu Sao rode on the Misty Claw Dragon again. Passing through the steep cliffs on the outer wall of the Grand Canyon, the Mystylodon climbed step by step towards the bright sky and earth above like walking a tightrope, cautiously and steadily. The process of being bathed in light and reaching upwards is like Icarus approaching the sun. But the difference is that the sun destroyed Icarus's wings and caused him to fall into the vast expanse of blue waves. What greeted Su Yi, who was constantly climbing up, was a gorgeous land and ocean. Click. The Misty Claw clung to the edge of the coral platform, jumped hard, and finally met the dazzling sunlight. Lu Coral Platform. I'm coming. Riku Coral Terrace started a sunny day as if Groudon had visited. Finally getting rid of the gloomy and dark Miasma Valley, the bright sunshine made Su Yiden feel relaxed. The Misty Claw was a little uncomfortable. The dazzling sunlight made its eyes uncomfortable, and because it had no eyelids, it couldn't close its eyes. Well, the Misty Claw is indeed a ruthless character, the kind that sleeps with its eyes open. You go into the ball first. Su Yi quickly put the Misty Claw back into the capture ball. What kind of cat is that? Lu Kao said, pointing not far away. At this moment, they were on a small platform like a plate. A stream of water flowed down from the platform above and poured into the plate, forming a shallow pond. In the pond, in addition to some swimming fish, there is also a creature like monkfish that is swinging its fins and crawling its chubby body in the shallow water. Oh, that's the walking lantern fish. Su Yi also looked at these strange environmental creatures with some curiosity. Lamp. Lu Kao was a little confused. Watch it, Su Yi said, walking slowly towards them. The ripples caused by the water he stepped on immediately alerted these vigilant little guys. The chandelier above their heads suddenly lit up, and then they hid in the surrounding corals and rock crevices. What a strange Pokémon, Lotto. Rotom pressed the shutter again, recording these little guys twisting their fat bodies. Huh, it's so bright there, meow. It's a shell, meow. Why are there such big shells here, meow. Lu Kao was immediately attracted by the scallop that reflected light from the light of the lantern fish. It's a pearl shell. Now the money is settled, Su Yi said in surprise, and then quickly ran to the huge shell growing on the edge of the coral platform. Is there any treasure, Lotto? Lottom also followed excitedly, ready to take pictures of novel scenes at any time. Su Yi squatted down and looked at the huge shell above the water in front of him. Inside the slightly opened and closed shell, a faint light attracted him. Ship it. Su Yi used a peeling knife to crack open the shell. At that moment, several pink shrimps flew out from the shell. Su Yi quickly caught two of them with his quick eyes and hands. Is this a coral shrimp? Su Yi guessed, looking at the cherry-red shrimp in his hand that were as clear as gems. In the game, there is an ingredient task related to the coral platform that will unlock the ingredient coral shrimp, and the rare specialties from these pearl oysters will also unlock the other two shrimp ingredients. The coral-colored and crystal-clear shrimp in front of me is very similar to the jewel-like shrimp described in the coral shrimp ingredients. A new continent on the tip of your tongue, get new ingredients. Su Yi put away the coral shrimp and took out the pearl that was almost the size of a fist inside the pearl oyster. The round white pearls reflect bright light in the sunlight. So beautiful, Lotto. Rotom quickly took a photo. There's a meow here. The cat on the side waved its paws. Su Yi hurried over and found a total of 3 pearl oysters next to each other behind a piece of coral. Huh, it feels like drawing a card. Su Yi rubbed his hands, then immediately opened 2 of them, and harvested some coral shrimp again. The interior of one of the pearls is even deeper, as if it contains a deep sea. I also want to drive a meow. Lu Kao raised his paw, eager to try. Here, Su Yi handed the knife to Lu Sao. Meow. Lu Kao pried open the pearl oyster expectantly. Suddenly, the pearls inside reflected the sunlight and emitted a bright light. Did it appear? Super rare specialty product, Su Yi said in surprise. Meow. Mao Mao held up the pearl with excitement on his face. The flawless white pearl exudes a faint halo, like the full moon in the dark night. 2 bright pearls, 1 deep pearl, and 1 ultra-rare white pearl. It seems that we don't have to worry about money for the time being. Suyi happily put away the special products. It's so strange. A small pond contains such rich ecology. Suyi sighed. There are walking lantern fish, various small fish, pearl oysters, shrimps hidden in corals and shells, and various aquatic plants around. The small pool is actually a bit dizzying, just like the prosperous ecology of the mainland coral platform, the epitome of. The mainland coral platform is composed of layers of platforms where corals grow, so moving here requires frequent climbing. Suyi used hooks and vines to climb out of the coral platform and onto the wide solid ground. The corals and rocks on the platform in front of him merged into one, forming a strange three-dimensional structure. What are those? Rotom looked at the creatures swaying in the wind not far away. It's the swaying eel. Ha ha ha. Suyi couldn't help laughing when he looked at those creatures that looked like garden eels. These swaying eels emerge from the holes in the ground and sway in the wind. They keep opening and closing their mouths to eat the coral eggs scattered by the wind. Watching them swaying makes the body and mind feel fua, fua, the ground swayed. However, they are very timid creatures. As Suyi approached, they suddenly retracted into the burrow. If it's a night with good weather, the rare orange swaying eel queen will appear. Unfortunately, it's not night. Maybe we can try it tonight, Suyi thought as he moved forward. And as you advance a certain distance on the dreamy coral platform, a coral forest comes into view. The pink coral tree is similar in shape to an ordinary big tree, but the branches are in the shape of coral. A group of aromatic pterosaurs surround the coral tree, absorbing pink coral eggs falling from coral trees. At the wind outlet on the side, groups of shining jellyfish swayed with the wind. They were the flying black hats unique to the platform. It's like a dream. Maybe this is the scenery I'm talking about. On the colorful coral platform, the pink coral trees scatter pink coral eggs, which are as colorful as falling cherry blossoms. The flying black hat's light changes, and it is gorgeous and strange. On the high-altitude platform, it shows the style of the deep sea, which is really like a dream, magical. Call. The wind picked up, and the coral eggs took advantage of the wind and floated into the sky. At the same time, a wisp of cherry blossom suddenly passed across the sky. Hide quickly. Without saying a word, Suyi took the dewgrass and hid in the grass nearby. In the sky, the cherry-colored flying dragon let out a roar that echoed across the mesa. It swooped down and rushed into the panicked group of fang-winged dragons. The fang-winged dragons immediately fled in all directions. The flying dragon turned nimbly and accurately grasped with a pair of sharp claws. A fang pterosaur. Then it flew like this while lowering its head to eat the most delicious part of the fang pterosaur in its claws. Then it released its claws and let it fall into the miasma valley below, becoming a buffet for other creatures. Sakura Fire Dragon, the cherry-colored queen of Lu Coral Terrace. Suyi looked at the queen who set off a cherry-colored blizzard and admired happily. Bang! The Sakura Fire Dragon, which had had a full meal, did not choose to return to its nest, but descended into the coral forest. She leisurely grooms her scales and leaves claw marks on the ground to mark her territory. Oops! Suyi, who was hiding in the grass, felt sweat on his forehead, because Sakura Fire Dragon seemed to smell something and looked at Suyi with some doubts. The grass they were hiding in at the moment was not tall, and they could barely hide their figures while squatting in the grass, and they were less than 10 meters away from the Sakura Fire Dragon. What's even more terrible is that the golden finger, hunting guide, on Suyi's waist suddenly dinged, the blue star on the cover lit up, and then it buzzed and trembled like a mobile phone vibrating, as if to remind Suyi something. Something like that. Unlucky, unlucky, unlucky. Suyi felt helpless. The Misery Claw Dragon has just recovered from a serious injury, but the wound has not completely healed. If it fights the Sakura Fire Dragon, it is very likely that the wound will be torn and then seriously injured again, which will eventually lead to a sharp decline in combat effectiveness. The remaining accompanying beasts have almost no efficient anti-air methods. Sakura Fire Dragon can kill them by just releasing its breath in the air. The most important thing is that Suyi only has 2 flash bombs now. He consumed too many before, and it is difficult to find them in the Valley of Miasma, and there is no time to find light bugs to replenish them. If he cannot use the opportunity to create 2 flash bombs, if effective damage is caused, the Sakura Fire Dragon that flies into the sky again will take the initiative. The flying dragons who are good at flying will not fight you on the ground stupidly. That is the mechanism in the game, otherwise the flying dragons will all be dung monsters. To be honest, Suyi doesn't really want to fight Sakura Fire Dragon yet. Setting up the camp first is the first priority. At this moment, Suyi felt more and more the importance of flying ability. Just when Suyi was about to release the accompanying beasts to fight a tough battle, a roar sounded like the sound of nature. Howl! Sakura Fire Dragon was immediately attracted. I saw a blue-scaled bird dragon monster coming from the other side of the coral forest. It was about the same size as a scratching bird, and it roared a warning without fear from the Sakura Fire Dragon, which was several times its size. Suyi gave a thumbs up. And Dazzling Bird, my friend, is the real hero. Sakura Fire Dragon was angry that such a thin creature dared to challenge itself. It roared, then opened its legs and rushed towards Dazzling Bird. The dizzy bird did not run away, but opened the luminous films on both sides of its head. While it was chirping, the luminous film on its head was warming up, flashing. Then, just when the Sakura Fire Dragon was about to approach, it raised its head. The luminous film on the top of the head suddenly released a bright light like the flash of an old-fashioned camera. Because flying dragons need to patrol their territories and hunt at high altitudes, they often have excellent eyesight, and their developed vision causes flashes of light to have a great impact on their vision. The violent flash of light immediately stung Sakura Fire Dragon's eyes. She roared in pain, then shook her head anxiously and swung her tail to attack randomly. However, Dazzling Bird, hiding his merit and fame, walked calmly in front of Sakura Fire Dragon and left calmly in the other direction. Suyi took this opportunity and quickly left the coral forest with Lukao. The clusters of corals on the mainland coral platform created many coral caves composed of rocks and corals. Suyi hurriedly got into a cave that was not wide. He opened the hunting guide that had been vibrating, and saw that the book opened and automatically opened to the accompanying beast page. A pixel icon egg kept shaking and cracked several gaps. It's the egg of the poisonous demon bird. Suyi suddenly realized that when he obtained the egg of the poisonous demon bird, he found that it had already formed an embryo and was probably about to be fully formed. With the help of the burning insect's characteristic flame body, now, the poisonous demon bird is ready to hatch. Suyi took out the poisonous demon bird's egg and placed it on the ground. Lu Sao and Rotom immediately surrounded it. The egg is about to hatch, meow. Lu Kao looked at the shaking egg curiously. Rotom immediately turned on the camera and set it to video. I want to record this moment, Rotom. Kaka. The eggshell slowly shattered, and then, the poisonous demon bird's egg instantly surged with light. Suyi was shocked. Is this a phenomenon that only occurs when Pokémon eggs hatch? It is impossible for monsters in the monster hunting world to hatch with special effects of light. Could it be that after this egg is hit by the accompanying beast, it will automatically obtain? Do you have the Pokémon's characteristics? What kind of Pokémon could it be, Lotto? Rotom pointed the camera at the egg in the light. The light dissipated, and a wrinkled, ugly poisonous bird baby stretched its body and opened its big eyes. Another Pokémon I've never seen before. Great discovery of Rotom. Rotom pressed the shutter to record the moment when this little guy first glimpsed the world. Wow! When the little poisonous demon bird saw Suyi for the first time, it immediately threw itself into Suyi's arms, opened its mouth and let out a childish cry. Okay. Suyi looked at the little guy exuding new vitality and unconsciously smiled at the corner of his mouth. But the little poisonous demon bird's cries became more urgent and eager. You must be hungry. Suyi slapped his head and suddenly realized that he had no experience in taking care of cubs. What does the poisonous monster bird like to eat? Flying walnuts. Yes, I remember that there are scattered walnuts on the coral platform, but I don't know where to find them now. Besides, the poisonous monster bird chicks also eat the same as the adults. Are the walnuts flying? Suyi listened to the increasingly urgent screams, and sweat broke out on his forehead. He usually puts some flying walnuts in items, but he has long used those as throwing objects, or eaten them as snacks, and now they are gone. Suyi, the Pokémon baby must be hungry. Have you prepared food suitable for the baby? Rotom asked on the mobile phone in confusion. Yes, Pokémon food. Suyi suddenly woke up. Jingle bell. Sonia, who was chatting with her best friend Lorena, apologized and then answered the phone. Hello, It's Suyi, what's wrong? What? There is a new baby Pokemon that I don't know how to take care of. Where are you? Okay. Lulina asked curiously. Is there a friend who needs help? Sonia nodded and said. He is a friend of Dandy and a fellow junior. He has a newborn Pokemon that he doesn't know how to take care of. A friend of the Alchemy Emperor. A junior fellow student. Lulina heard for the first time that the powerful Alchemy Emperor also had a junior fellow disciple. Anyway, I'm sorry that I can't continue chatting with you. Sonia apologized. Lulina smiled nonchalantly and said, what are you talking about? Let's go and see it together. Good. After finding Suyi in the park, Sonia immediately took Suyi to a shopping mall. You can buy almost all Pokemon daily necessities here. Of course, Pokemon babies need to pay special attention to carefully select the right food. For example, what kind of texture does this Pokemon like, what are its attributes, and what are the characteristics of its usual food? Wait, otherwise it will cause discomfort, illness, and even affect future growth. Sonia came to a counter and while educating Suyi about science, she would pop up one or two professional terms from time to time. Suyi scratched his head. It felt itchy. Is he going to have a brain? PFF'd. Lulina, who was accompanying Sonia at the side, couldn't help but chuckle when she saw that Suyi, a tall adult, was being lectured like a child and was overwhelmed. So, I don't know this Pokemon either. It's a brand new Pokemon you captured from somewhere, right? Do you know its attributes and feeding habits? Sonia asked. Let me take a look. Suyi turned his back and opened the hunting guide. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.